Slaves removed dirt and dug out sand. People were exhausted working at the mine. They raised water, carried hay. The slaves moved as quickly as possible. Voices of commands could be heard everywhere. The whip beat relentlessly on the shoulders. Goblins controlled every movement. They were visible everywhere, at every step. Blood flowed down his back, mixing with sweat. His body was covered in wounds and dirt. This long life was unbearable. Slavery was harsher than death itself. He was considered the strongest man in the world. At the age of 27, he won the championship title. He held the title of the best fighter for 2 years in a row. The fierce fight continued in the ring. The referee gave the signal. The fight was stopped. The towel was thrown in. The opponent surrendered. The record remained unbroken. His career moved forward. He had 23 wins and no losses. He was the heavyweight champion of the world's main MMA league. Even the last fight before leaving was won. This fighter was an athlete from South Korea. His name was Chai Han-seok, the national pride. He retired undefeated, at the height of his glory. After his farewell to the sport, tragedy struck. He was hit by a truck shortly after his career ended. The savings accumulated over the years disappeared. All the efforts and hard work were wasted. Years of struggle ended in sudden death. He died alone, without having time to rest. His life was marked by eternal struggle. The name Han-seok remained only in history. 30 minutes passed after the death. Inner calm replaced fear. Hyun-seok understood. There will be no more fights, no more training or suffering. The thought that it was over was comforting. He had no family or friends. No one would mourn his death. Suddenly, a radiance flared up in front of him. Light tore through the darkness and filled everything around him. An outstretched hand appeared inside the glow. He froze. It was something unreal. A girl came out of the light. Her name was Rachel. She looked calm. She called herself a recruiter from another world. Her job is to find the dead with unfinished destinies. He heard the word scout and was surprised. The thought that this was an angel came to mind immediately. He waited for an explanation, frozen with tension. The girl began to explain in a restrained voice. "You have 2 paths," she said. "The first way is to accept death and wait for rebirth. Eternity as an ordinary old man. The second was to be reborn as a hero in another world, a world that was waiting for his strength." This offer was unexpected and strange. He couldn't believe what was happening. A slight distrust appeared inside. Everything seemed too fantastic. He asked for time to think. Angel was surprised that he could refuse such a chance. Wealth, fame, and attention of women were promised. Heroes were offered unique privileges. The bonus was a status window for strengthening. However, Hyun-seok continued to think. The thought of fighting did not inspire enthusiasm. He had just left the ring, retired from fighting. A new war seemed like a step backwards. Angel noticed that he still had doubts. It was time for an explanation. She told about the hero's life in another world. From the first days, the village elder will come running to meet him. He will give him food and will be delighted. The hero will solve simple tasks with ease. The headman will be touched by attention and kindness. Then he will offer his daughter as a wife. The girl is considered the most beautiful in the village. This offer will be a sign of gratitude. Hyun-seok remained thoughtfully silent. Even after everything that had been said, he did not answer. Angel began to lose patience. The thought of failing the bonus mission arose. She had no choice but to activate Plan B. Angel changed her tone and turned away. No decision made, so the chance was lost. Rachel began to disappear in a stream of light. Hyun-seok screamed in panic. He didn't want to lose his last chance. Angel had told him that he would be stuck with the life of an old bachelor. The next life would be far from guaranteed. He might not be born human at all. Her smile hid a warning. Hyun-suk hesitated, overcome with doubt. He rushed forward and grabbed her leg. His thoughts were confused. His voice broke into a scream. He agreed, accepted the fate of a hero. The angel paused and turned. She wanted to hear it clearly. He screamed again, loud and clear. He had chosen the path of a hero, without reservation. The angel smiled and nodded. The transition begins right now. Hyun-suk couldn't believe what was happening. His expectations were crumbling with each passing second. He had hoped for preparation and a pause. But there was no time. The process had already started. She only wished him luck in his adventures. The words were said with a slight laugh. The world before my eyes began to disappear. Everything around me began to spin and scatter into light. The transition to another world began without warning. The adventure he didn't want had already begun. Hyun-suk disappeared. Only Angel remained. She wondered why he hesitated for so long. There was already too much to do. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Report arrived. Hero number 137421 has completed the migration. Angel reminded her to send her a bonus. At this time, someone's voice called to open his eyes. Hyun-suk woke up on a wooden bed. It seemed to him that the very quest had begun. Everything looked too predictable. But suddenly, he heard a threat and felt a sharp blow. Someone was clearly not happy about his appearance. The man with the animal's head stood over him. Dendron demanded an explanation, rudely. Hyun-suk didn't understand what was happening. This was definitely not the village chief from the story. Thoughts about the girl and the quests were scattered. There was a suspicion that something had gone wrong. Hyun-suk convinced himself that it was just a training monster. He decided to act like a Korean. A quick strike, he attacked unexpectedly. The plan seemed simple and clear. However, the enemy reacted instantly. He grabbed Hyun-suk by the leg. Anger and irritation were in every movement. He was tired of this nonsense. Where do these crazy people come from? The fight ended with a loud crunch. Pain shot through Hyun-suk's leg. He didn't understand how it could have gone like this. The last thing he saw was a fist flying into his face. The demon called him Dear Self-Proclaimed Hero. The underground prison was shrouded in dampness and darkness. Hyun-suk was knocking on the door, clearly psychotic. He was demanding that the demon with horns be brought back for a rematch. The door creaked open. A goblin walked in, holding a real sword in his hand. His gaze was irritated and lazy. He saw who was making the noise. Hyun-suk noticed that the goblin had a real weapon. The situation was no longer a game. The goblin was threatening to make soup out of him for his screams. The sword flashed in the dim torchlight. Hyun-suk immediately promised to be quiet. The goblin continued to stare at him. The warning was clear. He was being watched. Hyun-suk confirmed that he understood. The goblin left, leaving behind the scent of blood. In the silence of the cell, Hyun-suk clutched his head. He recalled the promises Angel had made. No bonuses, food, or beauties had appeared. He was stuck in a dirty prison for no reason. Even here, the chances of dying a virgin were high. The second world did not live up to expectations. Hyun-suk felt his hope slipping away again. Suddenly he heard a voice from the next cell. The boy addressed him from behind the bars. It was a prisoner with a bold confidence. He called himself an elder and a future hero. Hyun-suk came closer, looking into the darkness. He was surprised. There was another Korean in front of him. He said that they were in the fortress of the demon army. This place turned out to be a prison for human heroes. Hyun-suk didn't understand how this happened. He asked why they were here. The answer was only laughter in the darkness. The prisoner screamed at the top of his voice. He called on the other heroes to confirm the truth. The cameras came alive. Voices were everywhere. Everyone was screaming that they were heroes and asking to be saved. Panic, despair, distorted hope, all merged into a hum. Hyunsuk froze. There was something strange in front of him. Hundreds of self-proclaimed heroes were captured. The neighbor told the truth about the cow head. It was not a quest mob, but Riedran, the head of the fortress, and that creepy warden. His name is Jark, and he's a real monster. His fame is built on pain and cruelty, and he's already watching him. Hope is an illusion, and there is no salvation. The second world turned out to be worse than hell. The prisoner named the culprit, a demon named Rachel. Hyunsuk froze at the sudden turn of events. This was no coincidence. The prisoner claimed that Rachel had sent them the wrong way. They shouldn't have started in this prison. Hyunsuk felt a chill run down his spine. He asked what he meant. Wrong way. The prisoner told about other heroes. They got to normal starting locations. Villages, cities, trading posts, not enemy bases. They started out as ordinary people. Their journey was long, but not fatal. They had time to prepare. Hyunsuk had nothing. No weapon. No chance. He found himself right in the demon's lair. The prisoner confirmed. There are only a few like them. Everything pointed to malice. Hyunsuk began to piece the picture together. Rachel, the angel who had proposed the deal, was the culprit. The second troop of slaves under the 3rd Battalion of the Demon King's army. The humans worked non-stop under the gaze of the goblins. The goblins watched, laughing. "We are the great army of the Demon King," Hinseok said. "Crush the humans, devour the humans," the words sounded. The work seemed to last forever. The pain in the body was unbearable. The goblin loudly announced the end of the day shift. A rough voice called everyone back. That fat little bastard, Hinseok thought. One day, he would definitely destroy him. In the cell, Hinseok lay on the cold floor. Fatigue fell upon him. Phew, he exhaled. Prison really is better. Suddenly, he remembered the words of the angel. She spoke of the privileges of heroes. She spoke of status and special abilities. But none of this had come true yet. He decided to test it out to see if it would work. I thought about status. A window appeared. Name, Choi Hinseok. Role, slave. Level, 1. Strength, 28. Dexterity, 29. Stamina, 31. Mana, 10. Skill, pickaxe, D. Bonus points, 0. Hero points, 0. He stared at the numbers in disbelief. Stamina, 31. What did that even mean? A voice was heard in the next cell, breaking the silence. Hinseok was surprised. His neighbor heard his thoughts. The stranger noticed his endurance, 31. Hinseok did not deny. The strength was 28, like a fighter. The interlocutor confirmed. Such parameters are rare at the first level. The champion of the previous world was truly different from the rest. Even despite his status as a slave, his potential is noticeable. The stranger hinted that escape from here was possible. Hinseok chuckled to himself. It sounded like nonsense. He didn't want to listen to empty hopes anymore. All regular prisoners only get the pickaxe skill. He got something more, which was alarming. He said, "Good night." Hinseok thought, even with such data, he was still in a cage. He was tired, but sleep did not come. The neighbors started snoring, creating a loud background noise. Hinseok decided to open the status window again. He wanted to make sure of the details of his situation. The screen showed the name again, Choi Hinseok. Role, slave, level, 1st. Strength, agility, endurance were above the norm. Mana, 10 units, enough for something unusual. Bonus points and hero points remained at 0. These hero points had no explanation. No one in the prison knew what they meant. The neighbor also said that no one received hero points. Suddenly, the chamber was illuminated by a familiar glow. The light was bright, cutting into the eyes, as if from another world. It was something Hinseok had seen once before. The female outline appeared before him again. The image showed a girl dressed in white. It was that same Rachel, the recruiter from the world of the dead. She appeared confidently, not hiding her smile. Her gaze fell directly on Hinseok, as if by script. She had not come by chance. Rachel was going to tell about the hero's mysterious glasses. She was in the guise of a fairy. Her appearance was accompanied by a soft light. She began to explain. The hero's glasses are a special function that makes the hero's path easier. But Hinseok barely listened to her. He silently reached out and squeezed her tiny body tightly. He didn't care what features and benefits were offered. He had too many questions and complaints. The fairy thrashed about in the air, trying to justify herself. She quickly admitted there had been a malfunction, all because of accidentally spilled coffee on the magic circle. The sound around them was muffled by magic, and they were left alone. Rachel was now his personal assistant, a fairy manager, forced to accompany him until he defeats the Demon King. But Hinseok no longer believed in heroism. He was not interested in war, missions, or duty. He stated outright that he was not going to participate in the fate of this world. He preferred the idea of simply living, without unnecessary noise, without battles, without glory. Rachel was surprised. Her calculations and expectations were collapsing. Before her was not a hero who was burning with the desire to save the world, but a tired man who dreamed of peace. She wondered, was this stubborn, sarcastic man the same fighter from the past, who lived for fights and women? Earlier, Rachel was kneeling before the chief angel, losing the last of her dignity. Her voice was filled with hurt and despair. She couldn't believe that such a humiliating punishment, to become Choi Hinseok's personal fairy, was actually approved. For a being with her experience and tenure, it was almost like an exile. Yes, she had made a mistake, but none of it deserved such a punishment. However, the decision was final. The head of the angels looked at her with stony certainty. The duty of a personal fairy is to be by the side of the appointed hero, to share his path, to help, to guide, and to suffer with him if necessary. The assignment was irrevocable. Rachel cringed when she heard where she was being sent. The Demon King's army's fortress. This is where Choi Hinseok was taken, and now she was supposed to be by his side until he fulfilled his destiny. Until the Demon King is defeated, or until the end, without the right to return earlier. She tried to object, but did not have time. The room was illuminated by a bright flash of light, and Rachel was gone. Angels don't discuss orders. They carry them out. In the cell, Hinseok said that the fairy must obey every word of her warrior. Hinseok stated that she must contribute to the escape plan. However, his thoughts about escape were abruptly interrupted. There was a knock on the cell door. Hinseok did not take any chances and immediately grabbed Rachel. The goblins entered the chamber. The goblins entered. Shouting and cursing, they announced that it was time for roll call. Annoyed, she whispered that she could have disappeared herself without resorting to such humiliation. But Hinseok acted on instinct. One of the goblins delivered a message. Raedrun demands Hinseok's immediate appearance. Sometime later, he found himself in the office of Raedrun, the head of this hellish place, the bearer of that very cow's head. The atmosphere was tense, but Raedrun spoke almost politely. He noted that he had heard of Hinsoka's efforts, especially from Jark. the same goblin who rode him as a mount. Hinseok was shocked. A compliment from an enemy sounded almost absurd. Still, the Demon King continued. He offered Hinseok the position of chief slave, an informal overseer among the other captives. Formally, it seemed like a promotion, but the essence remained the same: slavery. The proposal came with an explanation. The speed of the camp's work was slowing down, and someone was needed who could keep an eye on the others. And then Rachel stepped in. She couldn't allow her charge to agree to such humiliation. She reminded him that he was a hero, not a servant of the demon army. Everyone was surprised by the strange sound. Hinseok, unexpectedly for everyone, accepted Raedron's offer and became the chief slave. His bow and polite tone stunned. Raedron relented. If Hinseok continued to be as diligent, he would receive a letter of recommendation to join the Demon King's army. Hinseok cringed inside. It was a trap. But he meekly replied, "Thank you," and walked out. Goodbye, escape plan, flashed through his mind. Several days passed. Hinseok, standing on a tower, commanded a column of slaves. He shouted commands, called roll calls, shamed and urged. People with exhausted faces dragged loads, dug into the ground, carried out heavy orders, and all looked up with alarm. Somewhere deep inside they hoped that the former hero was just playing a role. But with each passing day their doubts grew. Due to his natural ability to command and lead many people, Hinseok suddenly received a boost to his charisma stat. The system window confirmed this, and a sincere smile flashed across his face. Being the main slave is even fun. Rachel, watching all this, was horrified. He led the demon camp with such zeal as if it was his calling. He's crazy! He's a hero! Hinseok just waved it off. With a grin, he told her to trust the process. Hinseok continued to play his part with a chilling intensity, pointing at one of the emaciated slaves, mocking him. It was at this moment that the system issued a new notification. The favor level of Raedron, the commander of the fortress, had increased significantly. He bowed without losing his rhythm and thanked Raedron with formal words. Beside him, Rachel was losing her composure. His actions were becoming less and less like pretense and more like voluntary integration into the enemy's system. Hinseok, however, countered everything simply and coolly. He claimed that he was following the system and that the system was part of the hero's destiny. He even showed a screen that indicated that his entry into the demon army's fortress was due to some idiot's mistake. Rachel was outraged. The system cannot use such formulations. It has always been programmed to be neutral, devoid of personal assessments. It sounded fake. Either the system had really changed, or Hinseok himself had started changing it for himself. Last night in his cell, Hinseok lay on his hard bed with Rachel thrashing about in the air above him. She was furious. How can he accept the enemy's offer with such joy and zeal? But Hinseok did not consider himself guilty. This chaos was the result of her mistake. A new task has appeared. Gain the favor of Officer Raedron. For completing the task, 100 hero points. This was serious. The hero's points, which none of the slaves had, seemed like the key to something bigger. Hinseok looked at the message and was confused. The system designed to guide him to victory over evil advised him to use the enemy as an ally. His surprise was genuine. It was as if the system was playing along with him in his strange strategy. At the Demon King's army's 3rd Army Corps' parade ground, the slaves, at Hinseok's command, began to sing a war song. The fairy, watching what was happening, could not believe what she saw. The system actually recognized this as part of the hero's task. At that moment, a goblin screamed behind them. Jark, rude and unpleasant, ordered Hinsoku to follow him. He obeyed without further ado and went to Raedron's office. Raedron noted that productivity had increased dramatically. Hinsok modestly attributed the success to the demonic officer's wisdom, calling herself only a rude, uncivilized performer. The fairy grabbed her head at this. It seemed impossible to her that such flattery could work. However, Riedran took the words seriously. The system immediately recorded the completion of the quest. The hero's task was completed, and Hinsok got 100 hero points. At that moment, the beginner hero shop was unlocked. Even the fairy, who was initially skeptical, was stunned. Hinseok had indeed succeeded, and the system confirmed it. He knew that now was the time to move on to the next stage. Without losing momentum, Hinseok turned to the demon with a new request. Allow him to organize training for slaves. Riedran was surprised. The proposal sounded strange. But Hinseok took the idea further. He wanted to create a group of elite workers, slaves, who would move and work in unison, like a fighting unit. And although the plan sounded absurd, he said it with such confidence that even the demon thought about it. The workers, under Hinsoka's leadership, were a model of discipline. They worked in a coordinated manner, completing tasks 3 times faster, without the slightest error. Such a pace and precision could have allowed the construction of the fortress to be completed in just 1 week. However, the demon noticed that the physical weakness of people made simultaneous work and combat training impossible. Despite his doubts, Riedran still gave permission for training. Hinsok thanked him without showing any internal glee. Later, in the prison cell, the fairy cried bitterly. The hero not only humiliated himself before the army of demons, but also enthusiastically trained the slaves. For her, everything that was happening became a symbol of defeat and meaninglessness. Hinseok, not sharing her emotions, complained about the noise covering his ears. It wasn't the situation that irritated him, but the fairy's constant complaints. Then he shared his real plan. His actions, which seemed absurd, actually had a purpose. He intended to organize an uprising. Using trained slaves as the core of the resistance, the fairy, initially skeptical, was stunned. The fortress contained about 3,000 human slaves, while the number of demonic soldiers did not exceed 500. In addition, there was a human alliance base nearby, the construction of which was proceeding at an accelerated pace due to the presence of slaves. The chaos caused by the uprising could be an ideal opportunity to contact allies and request reinforcements. Hinseok, however, remained focused and reminded that there was only one thing left to do: check what reward the system had prepared for completing the current quest. After Hinseok's words, the fairy did not hide her surprise. She could hardly believe that the story about the quest and the hero's glasses was true. She considered what was happening to be a ridiculous farce, but now a system window with confirmation appeared in front of her. Hinseok easily dispelled her suspicions. He had already mentioned the existence of the hero shop, and now it was time to check it out. He opened the interface and clicked on the store icon, hoping that the system would offer something worthwhile. Hinseok watched with satisfaction as a notification about the hero's first skills appeared on the system screen. However, the joy quickly gave way to bewilderment. Among the new abilities were holding breath and holding shit, and also household skills like cooking, cleaning, and washing. The fairy couldn't help but laugh. Such abilities are the result of the low level of the shop. To get really meaningful skills, you had to earn more points and unlock the next levels. In response to her mockery, Hinseok grabbed the fairy in irritation, and she screamed, asking for help. Meanwhile, the training of slaves continued in the fortress. Under Hinseok's orders, they sang the war anthem of the Demon King's Third Army Corps in unison. The song celebrated the might of the army, the eating of people, and the love of one's master. Hinseok conducted the proceedings with obvious enthusiasm. Riedran, watching the proceedings, was glad that he had allowed Hinsoku to take responsibility for the discipline and training of the slaves. However, the atmosphere suddenly changed. A goblin entered Riedren's office with an anxious look and an urgent report. The demon became wary. According to the goblin, the human army was approaching the fortress. The fortress's fall was a matter of time. Moreover, the 8th Demon Division, the largest local unit, was trapped and began to retreat. The sudden threat completely changed the context of the situation. Fun training and loyalty games turned into something much more serious. Chaos engulfed the fortress. With the defeat of the 8th Division, the advance of the human army became inevitable. The goblins began to panic, and Riedren was angry. After all the effort put into building, everything was in jeopardy. He gave urgent orders, but did not allow himself to leave the fortress without a final effort. He reminded them that war was a battle for supplies, and a competent supply officer could not be lost. He took responsibility for Hinseok. At this time, Hinseok, who was playing the role of a supervisor out of habit, was about to give an order to the slaves, but he felt something was wrong. He realized that his strength was insufficient to carry out the planned coup. In desperation, he hoped for a sudden event that could change everything. And it actually happened. The army of men began to storm. A loud cry from their commander cut through the air, and knights with spears rushed into battle. The goblins were unable to hold back the onslaught. The vanguard was swept away, and the war began at the very gates. Riedren appeared suddenly. Without explanation, he demanded that Hinseok follow him. He was at a loss, not understanding where and why, but he obeyed. The attack had already begun. Soon a knight appeared on the field, heading straight for Riedren, shouting his nickname, the Red Nightmare. Hinseok froze. An idea flashed through his head. Now, while the demon was distracted, he could strike him in the back and run away to the people. But everything changed in a second. Riedren stopped the enemy with his bare hands. He grabbed the knight by the head and crushed it with one movement. His technique, it turned out, was devastating. The 7th technique of martial arts. The blast wave that followed swept across the battlefield, destroying everything in its path. Hinseok froze. His chance was gone. Instead of running, he found himself standing next to the living embodiment of horror. The question of leaving right now hung in the air, but he already knew the answer. He complied. The atmosphere at the main tower was tense. Evacuations were being carried out hastily. Soldiers were directing the flow of people, separating the slaves from the warriors. Some men and women were taken aside and told that there was a separate procedure for them. This brought relief and even pride to many. For the first time in a long time, they were treated with respect, as real soldiers. When the evacuation of civilians was completed, a high-ranking officer appeared, the Duke of the Empire Drasen Olaven Gremier. He calmly watched what was happening, giving short orders without showing any excitement or pity. After confirming that all who called themselves warriors were gathered in one place, he gave the signal. The army soldiers took up positions and drew their swords in unison. Those who were considered saved watched the events with bewilderment. Their confusion turned to alarm, and then to despair, when it became clear that the order was not about protection, but about elimination. A small procession moved through the dense forest in horse-drawn carriages. In one of the carriages, Hinseok sat, covering his face with his hand, lost in dark thoughts. Disappointment and despair boiled inside him. He mentally said goodbye to the dream of liberation, of a great adventure, of his second life. Now he was not going to freedom, but to the enemy rear. The fairy who accompanied him tried her best to restore Hinseok's sense of duty and self-confidence. This is not the end, but a chance to change everything. But Hinseok brushed her words aside. The demon was dozing next to him. Waking up, he turned to Hinseok, not noticing his inner turmoil. Hinseok, hiding his true emotions, quickly feigned cordiality, stating that it was a great honor for him to accompany such an important officer. The demon, pleased with the answer, reassured him by telling him that they had almost arrived at the headquarters of the Third Corps, and soon Hinseok will be officially accepted into the army. The fairy, watching this, could not hide her horror. Hensok, who had found himself on the brink of death, now voluntarily walked into the enemy's mouth, surrounded by demons, plunging deeper and deeper into their world. Commands and footsteps were heard near the main gates of the castle. The guards were hastily opening the passage. The carriage drove inside under the gaze of the demons. Without wasting any time, Ridran stepped out and briefly told Hinsoku to follow him. He explained that he was heading straight to the commander. Hensok noted that it was a great honor to meet him. Ridran was wary. The escort reminded that the commander does not tolerate liberties, and in case of disrespectful behavior, even an ally could face death. Hinseok felt the tension building up inside him. He tried to calm down, remembering that courage and self-control can save even in the face of mortal danger. He firmly decided not to give in to fear. When they entered the castle, the atmosphere inside was cold and reserved. Narrow corridors, decorated with the dark emblems of the demon army, led them to a massive door. Ridran stopped in front of her, announcing his arrival, and a voice from within gave permission to enter. Hensok was surprised. The voice was female. Could the commander really be a woman? The inner hall was spacious, with a high ceiling and a decorated throne in the center. A young girl sat on the throne. She did not seem weak or kind. On the contrary, there was danger in her smile. When she saw Ridran, she greeted him warmly but reservedly. Hinseok was surprised to realize that the commander of the demon army he was brought to was a woman. Hems watched the newcomers with obvious pleasure. Her voice was soft, but with obvious irony as she greeted Ridran, noting the change in his appearance. He, without losing his dignity, responded with a compliment, comparing her beauty to something sublime. When it came to the failure to defend the fortress, Hemes showed a show of generosity. She blamed the commander of the 8th Division and even joked with dark amusement about his fate. She wanted a bag made of his skin. Hinsoku found it hard to breathe under the pressure. Hemes's presence felt like something predatory and all-consuming. When she asked who Hinsok was, Ridran introduced him as the man he had already spoken of, and he offered to include him in the ranks of the demon army. Hemes appreciated his appearance, noting his cuteness and origin, but she expressed doubts about his physical readiness for service. She coolly declined Ridran's offer to personally train him, explaining that his time was too valuable. Suddenly, the situation changed. Hemes's face twisted into a terrifying mouth with fangs, her body glowing with an inhuman aura. Hinseok froze in horror, but instead of attacking, she simply handed him her pet, a small but clearly dangerous creature named Bobo. The creature looked like a dog, but it emanated a power that was not typical of animals. Ridran noted his strength and elegance, agreeing with Hemes, who looked at Hinseok, pleased, waiting for a reaction. Hinseok, without hesitation, shouted out his formal consent, expressing his honor at being appointed as a caretaker. Hemes smiled with satisfaction and handed him her pet. Hemes warned Hinsoka that Bobo was currently in a growth spurt and needed to be fed regularly. Otherwise, he may become aggressive. Finding a new caretaker is not an easy task because all the previous ones were eaten by the pet. Hinseok could barely contain his tension as he held the demonic beast in his arms as he headed towards Bobo's house. He, who found himself among the demons, is now responsible for the commander's pet. Even the fairy accompanying him was surprised by the new task that appeared in the hero's interface. He read the objective: win Bobo's favor. The reward was 200 hero points. That was surprisingly high. Hinseok was amazed. It turns out that winning a pet's trust can be no less important than winning on the battlefield. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Behind it was a goblin, who greeted him rudely and introduced himself. He said that all the previous caretakers were dead, And now, together with Hinsok, they would prepare food for Bobo. The goblin took the event with a grim enthusiasm, showing that he saw Hinsok more as food than as a partner. Suddenly, Bobo woke up and easily jumped onto the goblin's shoulders. In a panic, the goblin grabbed Hinsok by the leg and, with a cry, offered it to his pet as a treat. Hinsok, horrified by the betrayal, got his bearings in a split second, pushed the goblin away, and shouted himself, offering him to Bobo. The pet showed obvious interest, which the fairy immediately confirmed. Bobo clearly preferred the goblin. At that moment, Hinseok realized that in the demon army, survival is not achieved through strength, but through intelligence and quick thinking. The fairy rushed around the room with frightened cries, running away from Bobo, who was happily chasing after her. Hinseok, watching this scene, was focused and tense. Bobo would soon be hungry. A message appeared on the screen about an item, a huge bone that could charm dog-type monsters. It cost 30 hero points. Hinseok immediately purchased the item. Taking out the bone, he caught Bobo's attention and threw it across the room. The pet lunged forward and caught her in mid-jump, as if he had been practicing for a long time. This temporarily calmed him down. The fairy breathed a sigh of relief, amazed by Hinseok's resourcefulness, and he only praised himself for his attentiveness. However, the calm did not last long. Bobo lost interest in the bone and began to rush around the room again, radiating hunger and excitement. Hinseok realized that one item was not enough, and that the pet needed something more substantial. Perhaps fresh meat. He tried to think of a way to stop the beast before the situation got out of control. Panic was growing, and then a simple word familiar to all dog owners popped into my head. Walk. He used it, and the result was unexpected. Bobo instantly calmed down and even jumped into Hinsoka's arms with confidence. The crisis was temporarily overcome. On the street, Hinseok tried to figure out where the kitchen was. The fairy, looking around warily, suggested asking a passing goblin. Hinseok approached him for help, but the goblin was initially wary, surprised by the appearance of a man next to Bobo. Suddenly, the pet's eyes lit up red, and he growled, which scared the goblin, who fell to the ground. However, Bobo quickly approached and began to lick the goblin, demonstrating that he was not going to attack yet. Hinseok said that he was now in charge of Bobo and asked the goblin where the kitchen was. He, having calmed down a little, pointed out the direction and hurried away, causing Hinseok to be surprised by such fear. The fairy confirmed that the goblin really belonged to the demon army. But such a coward! They laughed. They decided to look for meat in the kitchen, laughing at the situation. Hinseok wiped away his tears of laughter with a smile, and the fairy asked with a slight grin how long he planned to take care of the pet. Hinseok thought for a moment, and admitted that he dreamed of meeting a blonde and getting married, which caused slight surprise. Hinseok searched for Bobo in a panic, annoyed that his pet had disappeared again. The fairy looked around and soon pointed to the approaching Bobo. The pet calmly approached Hinsoku, wagging its tail. Despite the voices of the goblins screaming for the death of Commander Rekis and threatening Hinsoku, the goblins were quickly approaching, threatening to eat Hinsoka and Bobo. Realizing the danger, Hinseok grabbed his pet and ran, but there was a dead end ahead. The goblins did not hide their joy at the upcoming prey, loudly expressing their threats and appetite. One of them especially greedily promised to feast on Hinseok's hand, comparing it to a chicken wing. Hinseok tried to gather his courage and focus, not letting fear overcome him. The goblins, watching what was happening, did not understand who was in front of them. They doubted and asked questions, showing ignorance. Hinseok corrected them indignantly, pointing to Bobo, Commander Hemez's pet. Some of the goblins couldn't believe it, thinking it was a human trick. But there were also those who thought that perhaps Hinseok was telling the truth. Fear and irritation filled Hinseok due to their misunderstanding. When one of the goblins asked what he was going to do, Hinseok activated Bobo's beast mode. The pet's eyes glowed red, and it immediately pounced on the goblin, inflicting serious wounds. Hinseok watched the vicious attack and noted how dangerous a dog without a muzzle could be. After this scene, the goblins, frightened and astonished, meekly apologized and acknowledged Bobo's status. Hinseok wondered who else would dare to doubt the commander's pet. A notification appeared that Hinseok had conquered many demons with his charisma, and his charisma level had increased. He was pleasantly surprised and was happy about the award. At that moment, someone from behind noticed a noise in the street. It turned out to be Hemez herself. She praised the newcomer, noting that he was doing important things. Later in Himez's office, it was revealed that Hinseok had been using her name and her pet Bobo to survive, which at first puzzled her, but then turned into a compliment. She noted Hinseok's intelligence and bravery, unlike many other demons. Hemez stressed that the demon army too often solves problems by force, which only makes the situation worse. She then asked if Hinseok had ever thought about becoming a manager. He admitted that it was still difficult with his skills. Hemez warned that she would no longer allow her name and Bobo to be used without permission. She announced an upcoming decisive duel that would allow her to take the title from her opponent. For a month, Hemez will protect Hinseok, but after that, he will have to defeat the opponent she chooses. Each victory extended his protection by a month. If he successfully climbs the career ladder, he has a chance to become a battalion commander and become truly useful. When Hinseok asked what would happen if he lost, Hemez answered harshly. Then he should not count on mercy, and he would regret that he did not die in battle. Hinseok realized that he had to agree, otherwise Hemez could kill him. This thought did not leave him. She even immediately chose an opponent for him. The fairy reminded him that the decisive duel would be in a month, and it seemed like this was a farewell. When Hinseok reminded him that his talent was rated as SSS rank, the fairy replied that potential was just a possibility, not a guaranteed power. He reproached her for her lack of support and complained about her indifference. Later, he approached the kitchen with the bloody door and knocked, apologizing to the possible occupants. A goblin came out from behind the door and announced that he was the very same chef of the demon army, Kulkan. Hinseok asked if he could get some fresh meat for Bobo. Kulkan learned about the change of caretaker and immediately refused Hinseok food. Hinseok was upset, and Kulkan explained that Commander Hemez's only order was not to raise a hand against him. But he added that if Hinseok wanted meat for Bobo, he would have to get it himself, by hunting like goblins. He pointed to the goblins nearby. Goblin voices could be heard everywhere, discussing meat. They said the meat was soft and tasty. The belly of Patel, who had died the day before, was delicious. Compared to Patel's appearance, the meat looked very appetizing. Hinseok, looking out from behind the door, was surprised. The cooks here looked more like butchers than cooks. Kulkan, noticing his bewilderment, explained that to hunt oneself means to get the meat oneself, only by one's own efforts. Hinseok stood face to face with a huge boar that was rushing straight at him. An order rang out in his head. Kill, because this is his dinner for today. He couldn't understand how he had ended up in this situation and why he had to fight this beast that had killed Morgan. For him, the hunt looked like a mad pursuit, and the idea of revenge was unclear. Which of them should actually become the prey? There was a bloody goblin lying on the ground, and the fairy was asking if they should just run. Hinseok knew that running away from such a crowd was impossible. He was in danger and knew he had to act. Suddenly Kulkan's voice was heard, declaring the hunt over. The boar was dead, surrounded by goblins. Hinseok wondered how they managed to deal with such a beast. But soon he learned of 12 dead and many wounded. Kulkan announced a break before the next hunt. But Hinsok understood that for Kulkan, it was just work, without any special emotions or worries. Hinseok told Rachel that he had decided not to try to escape anymore. There was a crowd of goblins and a dead boar standing in front of him, and the fairy asked in surprise if he was going to hunt monsters with them. He replied that he was not going to, but noted that stats only increase with leveling, and that requires experience. Rachel asked where he could get it in such a situation. Hinseok explained that experience can be gained even for delivering the final blow. The fairy was surprised, but he thanked her for the answer and said, "Let's go." Hinseok, realizing that he had few options, decided that he had to become stronger in a month, especially if the commander took it seriously. Chief Kulkan was at first surprised that Hinseok did not run away, but he replied that he would never do such a thing. Hinseok explained that he wanted to join the next hunt with the army of brave demons because he couldn't just sit around doing nothing. Kulkan approved of this attitude and said with a smile that he loved such people. In response, Hinseok laughed and thanked the boss. Kulkan appointed Hinsok as the leader of the next hunt, which was a great honor since usually newcomers are not trusted with such a role. Hinseok was embarrassed, thinking that he would not be able to command the noble demons and that the other chefs might rebel. At that moment, the goblin reported a monster attack. A herd of damage was approaching. Kulkan responded calmly, explaining that the damage meat was not tasty. He ordered everyone to draw their weapons and prepare for battle in order to add Yuron stew to the menu. Hinseok decided to stay closer and try to deliver the finishing blow. Then suddenly, Rachel reminded him of this and added a bonus, slightly increasing health and strength for 3 minutes. Hinseok hit her on the head for not using it earlier and quickly got ready to fight. He thought of the noble blonde lady and her 5 bunny-like children, which inspired him to protect his pension. With these thoughts, he rushed into battle. Hinseok watched with glee as the level-up messages appeared on the screen. With one last blow, he rose 4 levels at once. The thought that if he continued in the same spirit, he would be able to reach level 20 by the evening filled him with hope. The battle continued everywhere. Goblins fought with Urons, and he skillfully chose the moment to deliver the final blow and gain all the experience. After the battle ended, he found himself next to Kulkan, the chef of the demon army. He offered him a piece of freshly cooked meat as a well-deserved reward. Hinseok tried it with doubt. The taste was rough, the aroma too strong, and the meat itself required a long chew. He was surprised to realize that demons were actually willing to risk their lives for such food. It seemed absurd to him, but at the same time inspiring. Then he had an idea. If he can cook food that is much tastier than what is currently served in the army, he will be able to win trust and even respect. He opened the hero screen and spent the remaining 70 points. 50 on the basic rank cooking skill. 20 for a special seasoning that enhances the flavor. The screen lit up, confirming the purchase and activation of the new abilities. Hinseok felt a surge of confidence. He didn't need strength to survive among the demons. He had another way. He decided to become a master of the kitchen, capable of not only fighting, but also controlling an army through their stomachs. Hinseok, holding some salt in his hands, began methodically sprinkling it onto a piece of fried meat. He spoke enthusiastically about how the new taste would blow the minds of everyone who tried it. His actions were confident, as if he truly believed that he would become a god in this world. A god of the kitchen. He handed the result of his labor to Kulkan, who at first refused, citing his fullness, but Hinseok insisted. He had put his heart and soul into this dish and wanted the chef to appreciate his efforts. Kulkan reluctantly took a small bite. The taste instantly brought back a flood of memories: childhood, home, his mother's words. His eyes filled with tears. He whispered, "Mommy," and then, sobbing, thanked Hinseok and handed him the bag of food, specifying that it had a shelf life of 2 days. He offered to come again if necessary. Hinson approached Bob's house. The dog jumped on him, but he handed him the meat in time. Boba instantly calmed down and ate the treat with pleasure. Hinseok looked at him with a warm smile and promised to bring more the next day. A nearby fairy noticed with surprise that he was almost like a real owner. A notification appeared on the screen. Bob's affection level has increased. The hero's task has been completed. 200 points have been awarded. Hinseok noted with satisfaction that everything went like clockwork. He felt relief and determination. Now he was not just a participant in events, but someone who was beginning to influence them. Having decided to save the points he had earned for the future, he looked ahead with confidence. Hinseok opened the status window, glanced at the numbers, and felt a slight sense of satisfaction. He had indeed accumulated quite a few points. He knew that they could be used to enhance stats, but he was still hesitant. The fairy, noticing his indecision, could not help but remark, "The glasses were simply wasted." Hinseok shrugged, admitting that he didn't know how to handle them because he had missed out on training. Rachel, clearly irritated, offered to quickly fill the gap. She explained that points can be invested in 4 main characteristics: strength, endurance, agility, and mana. Magic. Hinseok asked about charisma. The fairy explained that it was a hidden characteristic and could only be increased through training. She added that it is important to maintain balance, otherwise the character may end up being one-sidedly weak. Hinseok doubted. It would be more logical to focus on strength. The fairy exploded. This, according to her, only works at the very beginning. And then, without mana, you can't go anywhere. Hinseok thought about it and began to distribute the points, trying to do it wisely. Then, on the advice of the fairy, he opened the shop and tried to find the ability Basic Magic Control. It was supposed to be the key to the first steps in the magical direction. However, the system returned missing. Rachel was confused. This was the most basic ability that should be available to anyone. Hinseok looked at her skeptically. He thought that she would be of some use. Rachel was perplexed why the world was so unfair. 3 weeks later, Hinseok finally reached level 100, although it took much longer than he expected. Lying on the floor next to Bobo, he realized that with each level he could accumulate more and more experience. Looking at the status window, he was sure that he was the only such diligent hero in this world. The fairy, however, considered this title too easy and even called it freebie. Hinseok countered by reminding him of how many times he had risked his life during this time. The fairy admitted that it usually takes about half a year to reach level 100. She was just trying to support him. At that moment, a goblin entered the room with the message that the commander had sent to call Hinseok. He headed to Hemez's office, where she greeted him and noticed that he had changed. Became stronger, and his mana doubled. Hinseok attributed this to his efforts to bring Bobo the highest quality meat. Hemes was surprised by such rapid progress and asked if it was all due to the hero-level system. Hinseok was surprised that she knew about his status as a hero. Hemes explained that she knew this from the very first meeting, and then hinted that this was precisely why she had called him. Hinson guessed that this was about Bob's training, recent victories, or an upcoming battle. Hemes confirmed and reminded him of the agreement they had made earlier. Hinseok had not forgotten about it, and therefore remained calm. Suddenly, Hemes changed and turned into a monster. She said that she knew from the beginning that Hinseok was a hero, and couldn't help but notice his rapid level increase. She demanded even greater efforts from him, threatening death in case of failure. And she ordered that she be entertained, reminding that the public is most attracted by bright performances and unexpected turns in battle. Hinseok sat in his room and thought that Hemes would most likely choose an opponent that he could never defeat, so that he has no chance of winning. If the captain hasn't warned yet, then the enemy is really serious. The fairy asked what he was going to do. Just die? Hinseok asked her to calm down and gave himself time to think. He decided that the day before the fight, he needed to study his opponent and understand how strong he was. But for now, only the name of the enemy was known. Hinseok remembered that there was a useful item in the store, a combat power meter for beginners, which is capable of showing the approximate characteristics of the target's strength, endurance, agility, and mana. It cost 50 hero points. The fairy was surprised, but Hinseok explained that he was going to use this device to learn everything about the enemy and make a plan for victory, as in a training battle. The fairy noted that his brain only worked in that direction, to which Hinseok replied that it was better than not using it at all. He decided to check the device and put on glasses, looked at the fairy. The indicator was 375. But it was difficult to understand whether this was a lot or a little. For comparison, he offered to measure her combat power, handing over the glasses. The fairy was surprised and asked where to look, but she didn't say anything. It seemed as if her glasses were broken. The fairy asked how Hinseok could be stronger than her, since her power was 1,560. Hinseok was surprised and asked what all the noise was about. She replied that she had 10,000 a month ago. Hinseok realized that the glasses really worked. He decided to test Bobo's power, which turned out to be 47,422, several times higher than their indicators. The fairy noticed that both of them were clearly losing to the dog and suggested that it might be a matter of breed. Hinseok went outside and began to measure the characteristics of others. The goblins were weak, their power ranging from 231 to 1,620, mostly close to his own. At this time, Captain Bulkman approached with a power of 14,300. Everyone with a power above 10,000 was at least a commander. Hinseok asked the fairy about his opponent. It was an orc named Kirkin with a pig's head. The platoon commander had a power of at least 3,000, and Hinseok realized that he had the opportunity to level up. Isn't this the same Kirkin who makes them clean the training grounds? The goblin with a power of 6,671 was full of determination. The fairy noted that 6,000 was a lot, and that Hinseok was literally being sent to his death. A system window appeared with a hero task. Increase the power indicator to 3,000 in a week. The reward was promised to be 300 hero points. Hinseok was surprised. It seemed like someone was spying on him, but he decided that he would either survive or not. Either he or Commander Hemis will win, but he will try to survive. The next morning, he met Kul Khan in the kitchen. He noticed Hinseok's new unique helmet, popular among the youth. Kul Khan ordered to prepare for the hunt. Hinseok noticed his power 35,230. This is definitely not the power of an ordinary warrior. It wasn't just the boss. They were so strong because they were fighting demonic creatures. After a short conversation, Hinseok asked permission to fight one of the chefs to become stronger and more useful. He thought that if he fought someone who was on the same level as Kirkin, he would be able to feel his strength for himself. Kul Khan was surprised at first, but then, after Hinseok threatened to stop cooking for him, he agreed, warning that the battle would not be easy. Later, the goblins discussed the upcoming hunt and argued about the strength of the participants. Goblin Golabakim's power was 2,620, and the goblins knew that Hinseok could be easily killed. But Kul Khan strictly forbade killing Hinseok and ordered to fight at half strength. He did not want to lose such a cook. The battle began. Hinseok went on the attack. Hinseok carefully observed his opponent to understand his weaknesses and learn something new. Hinseok noticed that the orc was fighting on instinct alone and took advantage of this by delivering a powerful kick to the enemy's face. The fight ended with a one-punch knockout, which surprised Hinseok. He realized that he could win the upcoming fight. After all, he was able to defeat an orc whose strength was twice as high with just one blow. This made him think that the strength stat might be a random number, and that he just needed to get a little stronger to win. Soon the goblins received warning of a large group of Talas living north of the Black Fortress, in the Great Forest. Kulkan expressed concern that Talas live in families and protect their young, which makes hunting difficult. However, since their meat, and especially their brains, are considered a delicacy, the goblins decided to take a risk and attack. They have an incredibly developed maternal instinct, so it is better not to touch the cubs, Kulkan said. The order to attack has been received. Talas meat is on the menu today. Kill with one blow. Don't let the body fluids leak out. Hinseok was in the way of the goblins, pushing the goblins out of the way. All the last hits went to him, and as a result, he got a level up. The fairy noted his ability to steal the last hits, which Hinseok found amusing considering he did it for the sake of the kitchen. Suddenly, the queen of the Talas appeared, a huge monster, twice the size of the others, whose power proved immeasurable even for Hinsoka's glasses. This raised concerns and the question of how to deal with such an opponent. Hinsok froze, looking at the Talas queen. Even the orcs, accustomed to danger, trembled before this creature. He didn't understand how to fight an opponent who couldn't even be assessed. Kulkan, instead of giving orders or organizing a defense, shouted and was the first to run. The other cooks and goblins, without thinking twice, followed him. Panic gripped everyone who had been ready to hunt just a second ago. Screams and stomping echoed through the forest. Hinseok stood in the middle of this chaos, stunned by what was happening. The creature let out a deafening roar. The ears were blocked. The sound was unlike anything familiar. Muffled, low, almost animal-like, and at the same time unnaturally shrill. It was hard to believe that a spider could make such a sound. He turned around and noticed more creatures approaching behind him. A whole flock of small monsters followed the queen like subordinates to a commander. Hinseok didn't hesitate. He jumped up and ran, not looking where he was going. Panic overwhelmed him. He understood that the slightest stop, one wrong move, and it would all be over. The forest flashed before his eyes. My heart was beating as if it was about to burst out. He no longer thought about missions or leveling up or hero points. There was only one goal: to survive. Hinseok stopped in front of the dark mouth of the cave. He looked back at the forest he had just escaped from, and he decided that here, despite the uneasy feelings, it was safer than among the trees, where danger could creep up from all sides. The fairy flew inside and returned with a short report. Empty. But Hinseok did not feel confident. Nevertheless, he stepped inside. The cave was deep, and the further he went, the more he was worried that it did not look natural. The fairy suddenly noticed the ceilings were so high that even the Queen of Talas could fit in here. But of course, that wouldn't happen. It seemed impossible to them. But Hinseok's thoughts were already moving in another direction. He froze, noticing a characteristic shine on the wall. Slime. Or, no, not just slime. He brought his hand closer. It was webbing. Lots of webbing. Too much. He glanced around the walls, cobwebs everywhere, white threads glistening in the dim light, and something else. Eggs. Hundreds of eggs clustered along the walls, under the ceiling, in the recesses of the floor. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a nest. He exhaled, feeling a chill run down his spine. This was very bad. There was a flash of light in the darkness, a pair of bright eyes emerging from the depths of the cave. Hinseok froze, but only for a moment. Panic exploded inside him. He realized he needed to get out immediately. It was the adult Talas. The fairy screamed about it, as if confirming his worst fears. He replied that he already understood it. He rushed towards the exit, but something crunched under his foot. The surface slipped, and he fell, hitting a stone. The pain took his breath away. This was no time to lie down. He looked around and noticed a round object nearby. An egg. Without thinking, He grabbed it and threw it at the approaching monster. Talus froze, then began to twitch his hands convulsively. His attention shifted for a moment. He caught the egg and held it in his paws with obvious caution. The attack stopped. Hinseok felt it, the shift. He knew what had happened. The monster had been distracted not by fear, not by the blow, but by instinct. The fairy realized the same thing. The egg was important, perhaps even sacred. Now he had a weapon. He grabbed another egg and raised it above his head. The monster growled. The reaction was instantaneous. It worked. He threw the egg, causing Talus to retreat again. He caught it, holding it carefully in his paws, like a baby. Hinseok realized he had found a vulnerability, not in his body, but in his instinct. He could use it to survive. There were dozens, hundreds of the same eggs left in the cave. Now each of them was a shield, a weapon, a chance for salvation. Talus was breathing heavily, standing among the broken eggshells. All the eggs were broken, and the situation was becoming more and more desperate. Fatigue was pressing, but it was too early to relax. The fairy confirmed that the supply was exhausted, and there were no more eggs left. Hinseok tensed. The creature approached slowly, angry and weakened, but still deadly. Panic was growing rapidly, and Hinseok tried to activate his abilities. The enhancement worked. At the last moment, the monster was already approaching. There was no time to think. There was only one attempt left, to put everything that had accumulated over these days into the blow. A dash forward, a final attack. He gathered all his will and instinctively delivered a crushing blow. The monster's body shuddered and flew away. The system window confirmed the victory. The level had been increased. Hinseok fell to his knees. The fight was over. His strength was leaving him, but he was still alive. The fairy's laughter rang out above him, nervous and relieved. He knew he was on the edge, but he wasn't going to die yet. After a short break, he reminded her that the fairy was now capable of using healing magic, although her abilities were limited. Opening the system window, he began distributing new attribute points. Everything seemed balanced. Strength, agility, endurance, mana. Everything grew little by little. Charisma remained in place. It was not yet clear how these parameters would affect the future, but inner confidence suggested that this was the right path. A voice addressed to Hinsoku came from the darkness. It was Kulkan. He appeared suddenly with his typical laugh, not hiding his surprise that Hinseok had made it out alive. The chief admitted that he was running from monsters and accidentally ran into this same cave. He seemed to consider himself incredibly lucky. Hinseok immediately clarified that the place they found themselves in was the Talus nest. He pointed to the shells and slime scattered everywhere, explaining that these were eggs laid right there. Hearing this, Kulkan's face changed. The realization hit him with wild joy. For him, this was not a threat, but a real treasure. This, the rarest delicacy. Hinseok tried to bring Kulkan to his senses, begging him to focus on the danger and leave as quickly as possible. But the chef gave in to the euphoria of taste. He swallowed egg after egg. To hunt the queen, you need the level of commander. So, this is the last meal of their lives. Voices were heard in the depths of the cave. Someone was approaching, discussing that they had escaped after all. Several goblins came out, and, seeing Kulkan and Hinsuka, exclaimed with joy. The chief calmly remarked that he had already managed to try the egg. Hinseok felt anxiety rising in him. Inwardly, he had already said goodbye to life, but then something in him resisted. He realized that he had not yet lived even a small part of what was worth fighting for. He had not seen the dinner that his future wife would one day cook for him. He couldn't die here, so stupidly, so senselessly. He had to fight, find a way out, get out. Commander Hemez's office was filled with the usual atmosphere of restraint and cold discipline. She greeted Riedran with restraint as he entered, noting his always dry and stern manner. In response to her question, he calmly confirmed that the task had been completed. As ordered, he had captured another saint of the Holy Empire. Hemis noted with some admiration how effective Riedran was. Defeating a group of fanatics in just 3 weeks was an impressive result. Deirdre accepted the praise with restraint, remaining humble. At that moment, a worried goblin poked his head through the crack in the door, insisting on an urgent report. Hems, annoyed by the interruption, hadn't expected it to be anything important. But the news was far more serious than she had imagined. During a foray for ingredients, the Talus Queen appeared. Most of the cooks, including Chef Kulkan, are either dead or are listed as missing. This news truly shocked both Hems and Riedran. Hemes couldn't help but let out a cry of horror, losing her cool for the first time. Deirdre immediately asked a more specific question. What happened to Hayun Sok? The answer only increased the tension. The Guardian had also disappeared. This made the demon truly surprised. His disappearance meant more than just another loss on a mission. The goblins sat in a circle, as if at a farewell dinner. Instead of glasses, they raised talus eggs into the air and toasted their own deaths. Kulkan, with all solemnity, tried to make a speech, but he didn't have time to finish. Hayun Sok grabbed him by the head and shook him. He demanded that Kulkan pull himself together. He screamed in panic, not understanding what was happening. Hyunsuk calmly explained that everyone present seemed to be under the influence of some kind of magical influence that had deprived them of their will. To awaken them, he used his secret weapon, an ancient book. New item, Encyclopedia of Demonic Creatures. It was a valuable artifact that held extensive information about magical creatures. It cost 50 hero points to use. Talus is a spider-like demonic creature. It lives in nests and moves in packs. It has powerful paws, vulnerable in the torso and head area. The biological fluids secreted by Talos are highly flammable. The eggs contain a flammable substance, comparable in explosive power to a small bomb. In caves, the use of fire magic is extremely dangerous. Hinsok thought for a moment and asked Kulkan if he could handle fire. Kulkan was surprised, but admitted that he only had wisps of flame. However, Talos's armor is impenetrable to his magic. Hinseok explained that he had no intention of burning the enemy, which caused the goblins to laugh. Hinseok then turned to the cooks, proposing to unite for the sake of survival, and the subsequent abundance of meat, including demonic, if they managed to get out of the cave. The goblins enthusiastically took up the idea, anticipating boundless pleasure. Kulkan echoed the sentiment, noting that to enjoy food, one must first survive. The question of the plan remained open, but everyone's mood improved significantly. It worked, Hensok thought. Hinseok reminded everyone of the plan and demanded complete obedience. From this moment on, no independent action, only running without stopping until the very exit. The goblins confirmed their readiness. Without delay, Hinsok gave the command to flee. The Talus Mountains blocked the way ahead. Hinsok swung his eggs, and Kulkan used fire magic. Flames engulfed the walls. The monsters tried to catch the eggs, distracting themselves from the pursuit. Some climbed the walls to save the masonry. The fairy noticed this. If the fire spreads too much, the cave may collapse, destroying any remaining eggs. But he deliberately placed some of the eggs deeper in the cave. The squad rushed forward. Hinsok repeated the order. Do not stop. The wounded goblins screamed, but he demanded that they continue moving. Eggs were used to distract the enemies. There was only one thing left, the last one. It had to be used as a last resort if the exit was not found in time. Rachel noticed the light, and, without holding back her emotions, she screamed, pointing forward. Hinseok immediately commanded to move towards the exit. Everyone rushed forward, giving it their all. The light was getting closer. The hope was getting brighter. Hinseok almost spoke the words of salvation, but did not manage to finish the sentence. A silhouette appeared right in front of them, dark, massive, with limbs as sharp as knives. It was the Talos Queen. Kulkan recognized her immediately. The detachment was surrounded. There was no way out. Hinseok clutched the last egg tightly in his hand. The monster didn't attack, it just watched. It was alarming. Why was she hesitating? Why wasn't she attacking? He realized she had a reason. He picked up the egg and shouted to get attention. If this is her weakness, then this could be her chance. He turned to Kulkan, asking him to light the fire. He immediately took the hint. Hinseok held the last egg above his head, showing it to the Talos Queen. In his other hand, a rag glowed, an improvised fuse. He spoke calmly but tensely. If the egg exploded, the entire cave would collapse, and everyone would die, both the queen and her offspring. He begged to step aside nicely to let him pass, but the monster did not retreat, but began to shake violently, emitting a piercing roar. Hinseok realized that the negotiations were over. His heart pounded. He cursed and threw the flaming egg. There was a loud bang and an explosion immediately flared up. Flames engulfed the walls. The fire began to spread, sending hot streams into the air, and then stones began to fly. Panic set in. Goblins started screaming about an earthquake. Boulders began to fall from the ceiling. The cave was collapsing. Hinseok gave the order again, to get out immediately. Everyone rushed to the exit, jumping over cracks and falling rocks. One of the stones fell right in front of him, almost crushing him. And then a message appeared. The level has increased. Others followed, one after another. The queen was crushed by a piece of debris. New flashes of experience appeared. Monsters died from collapse and fire. Rachel screamed, trying to urge everyone on. No one was to stop. Hinseok was surprised to realize that the collapse caused by the egg's explosion had given him a huge boost in experience. All the fallen Talos were somehow counted towards his account. He didn't even get to actually fight most of them. Some kind of homemade bomb, and a whole level of experience to boot. He barely held back a smile. But the joy was premature. The entrance to the outside was still blocked by the Talos Queen. Staying in the cave meant certain death. Action was needed. He turned to Rachel for support. Any magic, even a weak buff, could help. Luckily, she was already preparing a boost. The plan arose spontaneously, to distract the monster with an exchange. Kulkan tried to speak calmly, offering a deal. The egg in exchange for life and freedom. Deep down, he knew Talos wouldn't bargain, but there was no other way. He lunged forward, intending to strike, when the queen threw a viscous green liquid at him. The web enveloped the hand, the movement stopped. The body trembled from hopelessness. Could it really be the end? But it was at this moment that Redrin burst into the battle. His massive figure, silhouetted against the fire, holds in his hands a piece of wood that looks more like a whole log. He ran straight into the queen, the blow landing right on her body. The monster screamed, blood spraying out. The power of the attack was overwhelming. Hinseok was amazed by what was happening. Everything happened so quickly. He stood there grinning. The Demon King Chef's army, which once consisted of 105 creatures, was almost completely destroyed. Only 6 survived. 99 were listed as dead or missing, including Chef Kulkan. In the room known as Bob's Room, Boba, the huge creature, lay on top of Hinsoka, as if trying not to let him go, as if not believing that he had survived. The fairy, still tired from what had happened, remarked on how lucky they were to have made it out alive. But Hinseok knew that this respite would be short-lived. He had no illusions. It was just the beginning. and something far more dangerous lay ahead. Rachel reminded him of the buff he had received. Thanks to the cave collapse and the destruction of the Talos, Hinsok had gained 75 levels at once, and a whole 200 hero points. This was a serious advantage, but he understood that even with such an increase in strength, ahead of them lies a test far more terrible than anything they have already experienced. Hinseok's enhancement seemed insufficient. He agreed. His opponent had a combat power of 6,000, while he only had 3.5. The fairy asked if he would really be equal to his enemy if he reached the same 6,000. Hinseok thought about it. He knew that power wasn't everything. Rachel confirmed that it is not only physical strength that is important, but also magic. It is with its help that one can overcome the enemy. Hinseok noted with irritation that it was easy for her to say that, since she wasn't on the front lines and heading off to her death. But the fairy reminded him that he had already used magic in the Talos's lair. This surprised Hinsoka. He didn't realize that he was actually doing magic back then, and although he wouldn't call what happened real magic, Rachel insisted that the sudden surge of power he had felt then was magic. The door opened slightly, and Dendrine appeared on the threshold. He asked if Hinseok was there. Hinseok was surprised by the officer's visit. Dendrine told me to go and meet the commander. There was a tense silence in Hemez's office. The commander coldly clarified the purpose of the visit. Dendrine asked to personally train Hinseok. He was confused. He did not expect this. Hemez asked him why he needed it. Dendrine explained, "Kirkin will soon become the deputy commander of the battalion. At this rate, Hinseok will lose the duel. But there is so much potential hidden within him that it is worth the effort. He wants to see how high Hyun-seok can reach." Hinseok thought that the commander would definitely not agree. However, Hemez unexpectedly gave the go-ahead. Dendrine thanked her with a short bow. Hinseok was left in complete shock by the decision. Hemez told him to leave, citing business. Hinseok thanked the commander for his generosity and bowed respectfully. He and Dendrine left the office. Hinsoka's strength had doubled since their last encounter, Hemez noted. It left her with mixed feelings. On the one hand, it was interesting to observe such rapid human development. On the other hand, it was irritating. She understood that if Raedrin continued to help Hinsoku, Kirkin would soon give in to him. Under these circumstances, Hemez decided to personally intervene to even the odds. Raedrin presented the training ground as his personal space, which surprised Hinsoka. He noticed that Hemez clearly had a special respect for Raedrin. Raedrin thought about Hinsoka's potential. He had a lot of mana, but he didn't know how to use it, and it was gaining strength too quickly. Knowing that there were only 4 days left before the battle, he decided that the training should be as tough as possible, since pain is part of growth. Suddenly, Raedrin attacked, which greatly surprised Hinsoka, who did not expect such an approach. Hinseok took the blow and was thrown aside, shocked that instead of a calm training, he got a fight. Raedrin demanded that Hinseok focus and block his attacks with mana, otherwise he would die. Hinseok tried to object, but received a strong blow and flew back. Raedrin was surprised, despite the lack of any special power in Hinsoka's body. His reactions and fighting skills were on par with an experienced knight, indicating outstanding strength of spirit. He realized that his failure to block the blow was no accident, and that Hinseok really did have a developed fighting sense. Raedrin decided to trust this feeling. He recalled the bet with the commander and stated that it was impossible to defeat Kirkin without using mana. So it's better to die here than to be disgraced in front of everyone. Hinseok realized the seriousness of the situation. Another missed blow. It could have been fatal for him. In his thoughts, he regretted that he had not yet managed to get married and take care of his unborn baby. Rendran called loudly for him to act, either block the blow or die. Hyun-seok asked God for help and rushed into the attack. Suddenly, there was a flash. The fairy's voice called Hinseok as a hero. He lay on the ground, with Rendraini standing next to him, noticing that Hinseok had finally gotten his mana under control. Hinseok raised his hand, feeling that his prayer had been heard. Rendran praised him and assured him that if he continued in the same spirit, victory would be within his grasp. However, when Rendra tried to help and took Hinseok's hand using his healing magic, he felt a sharp pain. It turned out that dark mana is like poison for people. Rendran apologized regretfully and, supporting Hinseok, urged him to hold on a little longer. The world rests on a fragile balance between three great forces that are constantly fighting with each other. Creating an endless cycle of suppression and opposition, dark mana neutralizes normal mana. Normal mana neutralizes divine power. Divine power neutralizes dark mana. Each of these powers belongs to its own source. Normal mana is the energy that is naturally present in humans. Dark mana is a force fed by demons. Its nature is destructive and unstable, but powerful. Divine power is the energy given to the servants of God. Its essence is purification, protection, and light directed against darkness. The Church of Thusis, once one of many religious organizations, subjugated other faiths through religious war, and it became the basis of a new state, the divine empire of Gotran. The central figure of this empire was the saint, the vessel of God's will, the symbol of faith and control, the one who could hear the voice of God. The saint, recognized as God's chosen one, was in captivity, cut off from the marble halls of churches and the loud prayers of the flock. Her room was simple and quiet, but in this silence she felt more peace than in the places where she was glorified. Captured by Evelyn Marriott's demon army, the new saint hasn't said a single prayer in days. There were doubts among the goblins about its authenticity. Riedran had spoken of its importance, but now they could not understand why it was silent. The saint reflected. Here, in captivity, she felt alive. The prayers forced upon her since childhood seemed empty. The world demanded that she be a symbol, but for the first time she realized her own will and was in no hurry to give it up. Riedran burst into the room with Hinseok in his arms, shouting for her to wake up. She noted that it was so rude. Riedran insisted on the need to heal this man. Hinseok was tossing and turning in unconsciousness, tormented by pain and heat, his consciousness floating somewhere between reality and vision. He barely felt the stranger's touch and tried to pass it off as Rachel's touch. He didn't want to hold a man's hand before he died. The saint stood at the head of the bed, looking at the strange man who lay before her, covered in bruises and scars, and raved about love and magic. Incoherent thoughts poured out one after another. Resentment towards the angel. Resentment towards the whole world. Complaints against fate. Prayers. Wishes to send Rachel to hell because she is a real demon and a maniac. And even a proposal of marriage. And all this was said mixed with childish complaints. The saint stood silently, listening to his words. Each fragment of his phrase sounded more and more absurd. She broke the silence with a short sigh and muttered with slight irony that it was still a real disgrace. Hinseok, suddenly hearing this, seemed to come back to life. He did not understand where he was, but he knew one thing for sure. Someone heard him, and it was not Rachel. The saint watched with mild surprise. Hinseok came to his senses and first found himself in the bear hug of Reindrun, who seemed genuinely happy to see him back. Hinseok, at first confused, tried to figure out if he was even alive, and only later did he realize that everything he said in his unconsciousness was heard by the white-haired girl. Reindrun asked if Hinseok was completely healed. The saint honestly admitted that she was not. The dark mana was still present in his body, firmly entrenched deep within. Removing it by force is too risky. Divine power could cause the organism to die. It would have been better to wait, and let the body cope with the poisoning on its own. Raindrun just hung his head, clearly feeling guilty. He promised to make up for it with training and make Hinsok a truly strong fighter. The saint did not understand why the demon was ready to spend his energy and time on a person, and why the person accepted it. Who was he? Hinseok sat leaning against Bobo, remembering how he had destroyed his home and eaten the soldier who had come to feed him. If it weren't for Bobo's care, he would still be in the hell from which he had escaped with difficulty. The memories of abuse, suffering, and dark mana remaining in the body came to mind. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't such a big deal, but doubts were growing. He asked the question with concern. The fairy remained silent. There was no longer the same lightness in her gaze, only fear and bitterness. In her eyes, he was no longer the same. Defiled. Unclean. Everything was seething inside. The fairy, usually noisy and cheerful, was now sobbing, blaming herself for everything that had happened. She called herself a demon with an angelic face, a maniac worthy of the flames of hell, and claimed that it was because of her that dark mana remained in his body. He tried to get a word in. He was joking. He tried to soften the edge, but all he got in response was tears and screaming. The thought was pulsating in his head. How can I calm her down? Everything was starting to weigh on him. He felt like he was about to go crazy. 3 days later, the saint was offered healing again after the training was over. Hinseok nodded wearily, noting to himself that she was as flawless as ever. He expressed his gratitude and then spoke cautiously about the request. He had a fight coming up tomorrow and he wanted her to pray for him. Moreover, he hoped that she would come to watch his battle in person. The saint looked at him in surprise. Such an address, especially a request for his personal presence, was out of line with her usual course of events. The announcer's voice was heard in the arena, addressing the crowd of demons. The day of the decisive battle had arrived, the confrontation between man and commander. The host introduced himself as Zack and got the crowd going, emphasizing the tension of the moment. Laughter, anticipation, and even mockery came from the stands. Hemis asked who Riedran considered the favorite. He was confident in Hinsoka, not only for his tenacity, but also for his rare talent. Then Hemis proposed a bet. If Hinsok won, Riedran would continue his training. If he loses, the mentor will have to take his life himself. Responsibility for words must have consequences. Riedran agreed. Hems just smiled cheerfully. She hadn't been so interested in it for a long time. In the arena, Hinseok was already facing the crowd. He was introduced, and the crowd reacted as always, with disdainful surprise. He, contrary to expectations, felt confident. This was his best form. Level 200. Strength 80. Dexterity 77. Stamina 88. Abilities: Pickaxe, Leadership, Cooking, and Mana Control. Skills: Riedran Style. He noted the emergence of a new ability and skill. Now he was much stronger than before. New skill: Riedran's Fighting Style. This martial art, created by Riedran himself, has its origins in the dueling techniques of the ancient Gauden. Passed down from generation to generation, it consists of 10 unique forms. Currently, Hinseok only owns 8% of it. He was surprised. The level was so low. He had to win. He had to earn a date with the white-haired saint. His thoughts were interrupted by Rachel's voice. She noticed with bewilderment that he was not thinking about the battle at all. The host announced the second participant in the fight. The one who must put the hero in his place is fighter Kirkin. The crowd greeted him with shouts of approval. Rachel and Hinseok were shocked. In front of them stood a changed fighter, much more dangerous than before. Even the fairy could not contain her surprise. Riedran also felt alarmed when he saw how much the transformation had changed the fighter. Hemis just smiled, saying that there was no turning back. Hinseok, looking at it through his magic glasses, noticed a sharp increase in combat power. More than 10,500 units. In just a few days, it had doubled in size. Rachel suspected something was wrong. The growth was impossible without intervention. But Hinseok knew there are no easy roads. He had to cope. There was nowhere to retreat. The host announced the start of the battle. Two warriors, a human and a demon, rushed at each other, and the arena shook from the impact of the battle that had begun. Kirk swung his club, and Hinseok immediately realized that one blow like that would be the end. The monster was huge, and its attacks were predictable, which gave a chance. You need to stay calm and avoid direct confrontation. Waiting for the right moment to counterattack, he decided on a direct blow to the head. Despite his efforts, the monster didn't even move, which caused doubt in Hinsoka. But then a counterattack followed. Kirkin broke his left arm. The enemy itself remained in full combat readiness, and its movements were still quite predictable. Hinseok calmed himself by remembering Riedran's lessons. In battle, you need to use mana. With its help, you can break the ground with one blow. The art of fighting is not only about strength, but also about tactics that allow you to kill your enemy. With this knowledge, he would have been able to defeat Kirkin, despite his power. The most important thing Hinseok realized was that without a real desire to kill the enemy, all attacks were meaningless. True strength was in the intent to win. Hinseok charged forward, using mana and using the first form of Riedran's fighting style, instant destruction. His blow hit the target, and thick dust rose up in the arena, obscuring everything around. When the dust settled, Kirkin was lying on the ground with a huge hole in his torso. The host solemnly declared Hinseok the winner, and the fairy admired his success. Hinseok himself couldn't believe that he actually won. Although he warned himself that the skill could not be used twice in a row, otherwise it could be fatal for him. However, suddenly Kirkin began to move, which caused shock and horror in Hinsoka. It was unthinkable. The enemy seemed to come to life, which the presenter called a real miracle. Anxiety and fear gripped Hinsoka, because the battle was not over yet. Hinseok watched Kirkin closely, trying to understand what the commander had done to him. The commander shared her dark mana with him and cast a curse of immortality, causing him to continue moving. Hemez noted that such rapid progress in martial arts is a testament to Hinseok's incredible talent. But Hinseok's fate depended on the curse and dark mana. Kirkin growled and rushed to attack. Hinseok thought he knew what to expect, but suddenly Kirkin grabbed him by the throat. Raising his hand into the air and squeezing it with great force, his eyes glowed with an ominous red light. The blow pushed Hinseok back so hard that he crashed into the ground, feeling like all his bones were crumbling to dust. The saint's voice supported him, convincing him not to give up and to believe in victory. Hinseok decided not to embarrass himself in front of the person he was going on a date with. Realizing that the broken bones needed to be covered with mana like armor, he began to concentrate. And a message appeared on the screen about increasing the level of mana control, from F to E, and then from E to D. This gave Hinsoku a new boost of strength and hope for victory. Hinseok concentrated all his mana power into a powerful swing and directed it at Kirkin, shouting a call to the saint asking for a date. The blow was so strong that Kirkin crashed into the ground, bleeding, but still did not fall. Hinseok realized that the instant kill created pressure concentrated on the opponent's head, and it began to work. The goblins in the hall watched the fight closely. Hemes was amazed at Hinsoka's ability, and Riedran said that he had never seen anything like it. In Hinseok's mind was the anticipation of a date. 2 days and 1 night with dinner and a hotel. Hemes warned that one must be careful, because Kirkin is a real monster and a hero in the army of demons. Hensok reminded Hemis of a certain hated person. Fun is coming. After the fight, Hinseok woke up and did not immediately understand where he was. The fairy replied that he was home, and Boba greeted him with a bark. The fairy said that the fight was over. The saint healed him and left. Hinseok decided to test his stats to understand the outcome and consequences of the battle. Opening the status window, Hinseok saw his data. Stamina, 82. Mana, 81. Charisma, 30. Hinseok was surprised by the noticeable increase in level, by 12 at once, as well as the increase in characteristics. The fairy suggested that she could heal him. Hinsoka's mana control increased from level F to D, which surprised the fairy, who did not believe in such a quick leveling. Hinseok brushed off her doubts. She was being noisy again for no reason. Rachel explained that mana control was one of the hardest skills to develop, so her reaction was natural. Suddenly he noticed a piece of paper lying on the bed and asked curiously what it was. The saint, while in Evelson's place of imprisonment, looked thoughtfully out the window. She understood that her actions were unusual, but Hinseok himself seemed strange too. In just 3 days, he mastered mana control and martial arts, something that would take a knight at least a month to accomplish, and would be completely beyond the capabilities of an ordinary person. His hidden potential was enormous, but at the same time he seemed too unusual to her, almost mysterious. The saint wondered if perhaps God had answered her prayers, or if it was all due to Hinseok's talent. But it didn't matter now. By winning the battle, Hinseok changed his destiny, and perhaps he was the hope she was looking for. She went to the door and knocked. When the guard asked, she replied that she wanted to go for a walk. At that moment, Hinseok read a note that contained an invitation to a date in the courtyard after sunset from Evelson. It was an invitation to a date, class 300. Evelson thought that she needed to see with her own eyes if Hinseok would become the one who would turn the world upside down. The moon lit up the night sky. Hinseok was excited about a real date and worried that he didn't know how to act. Ask for a phone number or start a correspondence. The fairy, tired of his thoughts, advised him to stop being distracted and return to the room. But Hinseok, grabbing her in his arms, ignored her words. The saint appeared accompanied by 2 guards. Hinseok greeted her and asked who was accompanying her. She explained that they were her escort because she couldn't walk alone. Hinseok remembered that she was a saint captured by an army of demons, and he wondered what he expected from this meeting. In response to his thoughts, she suggested going for a walk. Hinseok felt his nerves stretched to the limit. The constant presence of guards made it difficult to concentrate, and he did not know how to start a conversation. The saint was the first to break the silence. She said that he must be a hero. Hinseok was surprised, but she explained that in their world, only heroes and demons have black hair, and only they are capable of developing so quickly. She then added that she was ready to answer all his questions. Hinseok thanked her, and suddenly he blurted out whether a man like him was right for her. The saint was stunned by his directness and did not immediately find what to answer. At that moment, a familiar voice was heard from afar. Riedran loudly called Hinsoka. The mood changed immediately. Riedran reported that the commander wanted to see Hinsok. The saint breathed a sigh of relief, and Hinsok tried to postpone the meeting. But the moment was lost. The saint, watching him, wondered, is it possible to trust such a man at all? Hems calmly told Hinsok that she enjoyed watching him fight, especially how he managed to escape death time and time again. She reminded him of their previous deal. He was to fight whomever she chose, and in exchange, he would receive her protection. Hyunsok confirmed the conditions, adding that he must become her subordinate. However, Hemes admitted that she was only joking then. She did not expect him to survive at all. But now, the situation has changed. She turned to Riedran, reminding him of his words about Hensok's talent and his potential to become a commander in the demonic army. And instead of another duel, she suggested something else. According to her, putting such an unusual person in charge in the usual sense is too petty. Then she abruptly changed the subject, mentioning catastrophic problems in the kitchen. The supply of meat had stopped, and the topic of cannibalism was already floating around. Hyun-seok anxiously asked why she would tell him about it, and then Hemez announced he was now the commander of the company of cooks. He has to set up the kitchen, and this needs to be done within 2 days. Hyun-seok was surprised, but tried to remain calm and agreed, smiling, although inside he was screaming with misunderstanding. The fairy watched what was happening with surprise and a cheerful smile. She didn't expect that Hyun-seok, who seemed irresponsible and frivolous to her, would be able to take on such a role. His determination and cool approach to business commanded respect, albeit in an unexpected way. Hyun-seok stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by goblins who could hardly hide their fear and irritation. He mentally calculated. The average combat strength of a company was about 2,000. Some barely reached 1,600. One stood out with a strength of 3,500. But their numbers were disconcerting. Instead of 300 cooks, there were less than 20. Hyun-seok could already feel Hemez's menacing shadow looming over his shoulders. If he failed this, she would only need one look to crush him into dust. He asked them who knew who he was. The answers poured out like a bag of unfunny jokes. One goblin called him a barbecue machine. Another called him a delicious man. Without waiting for the end of the sentence, Hyun-seok angrily punched the speaker, setting the rules from the start. Now he is here. The power. He showed the document confirming his appointment and gave the first order, to treat him as a deity. When asked about the losses in the company, one of the goblins replied that most of them had gone hunting and were killed by demonic beasts. Standard story. They attacked first and paid the price. Kirkin, who could have possibly held them back, is no longer in command. The last question remained. Which of them was the better cook? Everyone pointed to Gomum. He appointed him vice captain without hesitation. No one objected. That was something. The first step had been taken. Chaos had begun to take shape into order. Hyun-seok dismissed everyone, knowing that the real work would begin tomorrow. Hyun-seok understood that at least 200 cooks were needed, and there was only one way to collect them in a day. The next day, he used the so-called Bobo method. The pet ran forward, scaring everyone who got in his way. The fairy, watching this, only wondered if he was really trying to scare the demons by using a pet. But for Hyun-seok, this was nothing more than Plan B. There was only one condition for choosing cooks. Take those who could be easily replaced. Sons of bitches who couldn't stand up to him. That's what he did. Seeing a goblin with the power of 1931, Hyun-seok didn't hesitate to strike him. Hyun-seok approached the goblin lying on the ground and, looking down at him, addressed him, calling him a wart. He offered to become a cook. The goblin was surprised by the nickname and tried to protest, but he didn't have time. Hyun-seok kicked him right in the face, cutting off any objections. His tone was harsh and unambiguous. Now this goblin will be the first. Hyun-seok explained to him a simple truth. In the army, hierarchy is important. The one who joins first gets more authority and fewer blows. He suggested that the goblin himself bring 5 lesser demons who would receive punishment in his place. Thus, he himself will become higher in the pyramid. 1 blow to him is 10 blows to them. This was Plan A, a power structure through fear and submission. A pyramid. The goblin, the commander of the 3rd Battalion of the Demon King's army named Doros, sat quietly at the table, enjoying a piece of meat. He felt at peace, and the taste of the dish only enhanced the feeling of calm. However, his silence was broken by a subordinate who quickly ran into the room shouting about the problem. Goblin reported that most of their battalion had left. Doros immediately assumed desertion, not understanding where they could have gone. In his opinion, they had no other duties than to serve him. But the answer astonished him. They all joined the cooks. The new chef is a man who is supported by Commander Hemez. It is worth just warning him to be careful and forget about the problem. However, the goblin was adamant that the situation could not be ignored, since the cooks had already lured 200 soldiers away from them. Doros got angry when he heard this number. At this time, many goblins had gathered on the street and were standing around Hinsoka. The fairy reported that more than 200 demons had already been gathered. Hinseok noted that this number was sufficient and ordered the recruitment to be stopped. Suddenly, Hinseok became alert. Doros stood in front of him, accompanied by an assistant showing the way. He immediately sensed something was wrong. Doros looked extremely irritated, and his steps were full of menace. Hinseok quickly put on his special glasses for analyzing combat power. However, instead of numbers, he saw a warning. The glasses cannot display a level higher than 50,000. This meant only one thing. Doros was several times higher than the permissible limits of measurement. Moreover, the system notified about possible failures during prolonged use. Hinseok knew when it was time to run away. Doros asked a direct question: who is the boss here, and who dared to touch his subordinates? At that moment, Boba barked loudly, as if betraying his master. Hinseok cursed mentally. Even his pet was now working against him. He tried to remain calm and came closer. Doros introduced himself as if Hinseok didn't know who was in front of him. Then he asked for an explanation without beating around the bush. Hinseok realized that this was just the usual amateur activity of the goblins, who had simply brought their friends. But Doros calmly but firmly suggested continuing the conversation in the office. Hinseok nodded, hiding his anxiety, and obeyed. The thought in his head was clear. Damn. And yet everything seemed to be going like clockwork. Doros asked if it was really all unintentional. Hinseok was looking for the bravest, and accidentally took almost all of his battalion. Doros came to the conclusion that he was not just dealing with a boor, but a smart guy, and it would be better to settle the matter peacefully with him. He nodded, showing that he accepted the explanation, and allowed Hinsoku to keep the recruited demons and use them as he saw fit. Hinseok could hardly believe his luck, and even felt sympathy for the commander. But the joy was short-lived. Doros said that he had conditions. Hinseok immediately tensed up. Something told him that things would not go so easily. Doros said that Hinseok should take on another of his subordinates. This statement caught Hinseok off guard. It sounded like an obvious trap. When he began to deny it, Doros immediately reproached him, reminding him that Hinseok was the first to violate the boundaries. Not wanting to spoil the relationship, Hinseok quickly changed his tone and expressed joy. Doros took this as consent and announced that it was time to meet the new subordinate he intended to hand over. Before Hinsoku appeared Usaru, a massive, menacing-looking hybrid of ogres and orcs. Doros introduced him as a charming subordinate. Usaru's power is so great that it cannot be accurately measured. He added that although Usaru was not very intelligent, his strength could be quite useful if put to proper use. The monster confirmed its presence in a low voice, saying that it had a headache. Hinseok stood before the assembled crowd of goblins. He declared that he was now responsible for Bobo, and also took the position of the new head chef. One of the goblins in the crowd recognized Bobo and said his name with admiration. Hinseok responded by praising his pet and handing him a bone as a sign of encouragement. After this, he announced the start of the reorganization and said that he had already prepared a new list of members. He ordered everyone to familiarize themselves with the assignment and line up according to the roles indicated. Fairy asked what criteria the list was based on. Hinseok explained that it was based on combat power. He assigned the weaklings and those with any cooking experience to work in the kitchen. He asked with a grin if his approach wasn't genius. Hearing the report that the formation was complete, he stepped forward to assess the result. 2 battalions lined up in front of Kinsok. He announced that the right detachment was now the cook's detachment, and the left one was the combat detachment. He checked the order, noting that if someone stood in the wrong place, there was still time to correct themselves. One of the goblins raised his hand and asked for permission to hunt so that he could eat fresh meat immediately. Hinsok received this request with internal irritation, but still ordered the goblin to come closer. To test his resolve, Hinseok set up an entrance exam and kicked the goblin who came. The beaten goblin cried, feeling his future ruined by his failure. Hinseok stated his inability to stand. At this moment, a system window appeared. Thanks to Hinsoka's leadership qualities, the squad was successfully reorganized and balanced, and the levels of the hidden ability, charisma, and leadership have increased. Hinseok asked the crowd if there were any more people interested, but there was no response. Having made sure that everything was settled, he gave the order to the fighting squad to prepare their weapons. It was time to hunt. To the north of the Black Fortress lay the Great Forest. A group of goblins cautiously entered the thicket. Hinseok noticed that the forest was unusually quiet today. Not a single demonic creature on the horizon. The fairy suggested that this could be due to Bobo or Usaru, whose presence scares away enemies. Hinseok agreed, noting that the 2 were the best soldiers and could not be ignored. The fairy suggested using bait, which surprised Hinseok. He explained that if they had meat, they wouldn't have to rush the hunt. Then the fairy offered another bait, those who attracted demons all the way. Hinseok wondered in surprise who could have raised such a child. Hinseok announced that numbers 14, 3, 1, 40, 3, and 7 should come forward. The fairy asked how these numbers were chosen, and Hinseok replied that he simply dictated the numbers of his lottery ticket. He wondered what if he had won then. After that, Hinseok instructed Usar to grab number 14. The goblin expressed doubt about the chief's sanity, but he insisted. Hinseok explained that weaklings are thrown in as bait to attract the attention of the animals. He then ordered a fire to be lit so that his lost comrades could see the smoke and return. The fairy doubted whether they would die from such a throw, but Hinseok reassured her that every 6th one would definitely return. Usaru couldn't take breaks and had to keep throwing the bait. The goblins were discussing that the human chief had gone mad. Some wanted to live a long life, while others thought it was better to escape as quickly as possible. Bobo ran up to one of the goblins, who assured him that he would dedicate his life to the Demon King's army. Cries for help could be heard in the distance. Hinseok thought it was time for those who had been sent out first to return. The bushes rustled, and the goblin screamed as he ran away from the monster. Hinseok decided to hand over the situation to the soldiers and then finish off the remaining enemies. The monster rushed to attack. Usaru actively fought, striking at the enemy. The fairy was surprised by what was happening, and Hinseok noted that there was no profit from the battle. All the monsters were broken and unfit for food. Bobo and Usaru dealt with almost all the monsters with one blow. Hinseok decided that they had to go back without those 2, since they only had 1 day left, and they were planning to come here early tomorrow morning. In the kitchen, the fairy asked why they had come there. He explained that they needed to check if the flattened meat could be used in some way. Hinseok burst into the room, loudly demanding that the idlers gather up and come here. One of the goblins was surprised by what was happening, but Hinseok reported that meat had been brought, obtained during the hunt today. Sous-chef Golem noted that the condition of the meat left much to be desired. Hinseok reminded that a real warrior must be able to do everything, including cooking. The goblin admitted that his experience was limited to guarding ingredients, and he had never cooked real food, except maybe frying meat. Hinseok calmly sent him off to do his business, and the goblin called everyone to a general meeting and ordered them to light a fire. Hyun-seok thought about how everyone younger than the battalion commander ate tasteless food and smiled. He realized that if he played his cards right, the situation could become much simpler than he thought. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and the saint turned around. Hyun-seok introduced himself, and she invited him in. The fairy, noticing the visit, immediately realized that Hyun-seok's visit to the kitchen was only a pretext to see the saint. Hancock handed her a plate of delicious meat, and told her that thanks to her support, he was able to win the final of the match. As a token of his gratitude, he wanted to treat her. The saint took a small piece and noticed that the smell of the meat was better than she expected. She started chewing it and thought that the taste was much better than what she had eaten before. Surprisingly, bright and pleasant. Judging by the empty plate, Hyun-seok realized that the saint liked the food. He decided that it was time for him to leave. However, the saint stopped him and asked what he was going to do after leaving this place. Hyun-seok replied that he was going to get married. She was silent for a while and then simply wished him to move on. He had ideas, but he wasn't sure he could implement them. When Hyun-seok asked what she was going to do after she left, she replied that she didn't know and didn't want to plan anything about when she would leave this place. In the divine empire of Guatrian, the capital of Gradium, the state was ruled by the Pope of the Church of Theosis. The subordinate reported to Emperor Guthrian and Pope Orvan IV that Evelson's location was already known. She is being held in the Black Fortress, where the Monster Eater resides. It was unclear how the saint ended up in such a dangerous place, and yet there were no demands or messages from the Demon King. The history of wars showed that it was possible to penetrate the Black Fortress only when the Monster Eater Hermes was not there. Therefore, a direct attack was considered pointless, and it was decided to secretly send a rescue party led by the hero, Sir Oseld, ordered by Emperor Gatrin and Pope of the Church of Theosis Orvan IV. The next day, in the forest, Hyun-seok stood in front of his battalions. Thinking about what the saint said, as if she didn't want anything, he decided that the chosen location was suitable for action. The platoon leaders were called forward, and the goblins repeated his words. Hyun-seok took some meat out of his bag and offered it to his subordinates. At first they were surprised. They thought that this was either a new way to bribe them or just scraps. However, after tasting the meat, they were amazed by its taste and enthusiastically swore allegiance to Hyun-seok. He refused to give them more and called the platoons to battle, and he announced that only the squad that killed more demonic creatures would be able to eat with their boss. The subordinates ran off to hunt with shouts, and Hyun-seok watched their zeal with a smile, pleased that his plan had worked. Everyone had become a slave to their own stomach. A system window appeared, informing you that the level had increased. Hyun-seok was surprised and happy to notice that during the battle he had quietly leveled up 10 levels at once, and his charisma had also increased. One of his subordinates asked who was the winner, and Hyun-seok replied that Vulcan's platoon was victorious. They were to share with him a magnificent meal, while the rest had to make do with the scraps. After this, Hyun-seok ordered everyone to get ready and take the meat they had obtained to the kitchen. Meanwhile, in the Black Fortress, where bodies lay everywhere and there were traces of blood, a man in a cloak was heading towards the saint's room. Inside, the saint was thinking that perhaps she shouldn't have shared her thoughts, but the fatigue from constantly holding herself back was making itself felt. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and a man in a cloak entered, declaring that he had come to free her. He said her name, Marriott. He took off his hood. It was Ser Geffen, sent by the Pope of the Church. The saint asked if he had really been sent for her, and upon receiving confirmation, she declared that she would not return, and therefore asked him to leave. Geffen admitted that he was also not happy with his mission, but he had to complete it. The saint warned that a monster eater lived in the fortress, and if he tried to take her, there would be trouble. She uses the power of the saint, and then the monsters will definitely come here. But before she could finish, Geffen tried to grab her. He explained that he was on a mission, and was not a prince, but a soldier, after which he used force to put her to sleep and send her to the capital. The saint was at a loss. She understood that he was using force, but she did not know how exactly, and she firmly decided that she did not want to go back. Geffen suddenly felt a blow to his head. Hinseok, enraged, immediately entered the fight, delivering a magical blow. The prince, assessing his movements, noted that the magic was used ineptly, although Hinsoka's appearance was ordinary. In response to Hinseok's insistence that he remove his hands, the prince continued the fight, delivering a powerful kick that knocked Hinseok back. Despite the resistance, the prince intended to take him with him. The fairy watched from around the corner, wondering if she should call Bobo for help. At this point, Geffen has an open scroll, ready to step in and use magic to take another person with him. Soon, Hemis, the monster eater, approached, mockingly offering help. Geffen noticed that he had already blocked Evilson's holy power and did not sense any magical energy from Hemis, deducing a difference in power between them. Hemis was so powerful that the story of her killing 1,000 soldiers in one day seemed entirely plausible. Geffen was on guard and decided that the main thing was to block her attacks, waiting for the right moment to take the saint and leave. But suddenly he felt dizzy. It seemed as if she had possessed the power from the very beginning of the fight. Hems smiled at Geffen's neat handwriting and suggested they continue the fun. Geffen realized that in such a situation, it would be a miracle to survive, even if he left without the saint. The mission was a failure. At that moment, a bright flash of light appeared in the room, and Hemes noted in amazement that the guest had fled, although she had asked for a favor. Despite this, she was looking forward to the real fun being just beginning. The Devourer, the Ancient Monster, and the Immortal Witch. That was the name of Hemes, the commander of the Third Corps of the Demon King's army. In the endless flow of time, demons were born and died, but the king of demons and Hemes remained unchanged, unshakable. However, eternity dulled the senses and perceptions, a high price for a long life that she paid, continuing her path through the centuries. Hinsok was thrown back by the blow, landing on the floor where Riedran stood over him. He pointed out that Hinseok still attacked directly at the forehead, and even magic did not make his attacks more effective. Riedran advised him to be flexible and not to limit himself. Hinsok admitted this, lying on the ground. Riedran added that no matter how strong a person is, there will always be someone stronger, and therefore you should not be afraid to use any methods to win. An honest victory is the privilege of the truly strong. At this point, the training was over, and Riedran praised Hinsoka. He smiled. The fairy was worried about his condition, but Hinsok admitted that he felt like he was about to die and asked to be healed. When the fairy began to heal, he breathed a sigh of relief. Rachel, surprised, asked if she was just an elixir for his wounds. Hinseok thought, not knowing what to answer, remembering the words of the saint, who said that only faith coming from within can protect. Hinsok didn't fully understand the saint's words, but he remembered that Mrs. Avalison had said that it wasn't necessary to become stronger. Rachel asked about the woman, reminding him that Hinsok had almost died because of the Holy Witch, and asked who she even was. Hinseok noted with irony that someone would soon feel God's punishment. Rachel sighed, noting that the mercenary was using divine power, and if the girl really was a saint, she wouldn't have been attacked by her own people. Hinseok agreed that it was strange, since the next saint must be valuable. He waved it off, and the fairy asked if this woman was really that important to Hinsok. Rachel called him a moron, and he smiled at her jealousy. She chided Hinseok for forgetting what world they were in. Over time, Hinsok lay on the ground, torn between despair and helplessness. Bobo ran up to him and barked loudly, as if trying to raise his morale. The fairy circled above them, asking questions and watching what was happening. Hinseok desperately asked to become a cat from a rich family in his next life. The desire to escape his difficult fate seemed to him to be the only salvation. Meanwhile, in Hemez's office, exactly half an hour ago, Hemez herself expressed boredom and a desire to see something interesting. She gave Hinsoku a serious deadline, 1 month, to prove his ability to defeat the battalion commander. The news left Hinsuk with a mixture of surprise and excitement. Hemez indirectly questioned his strength by offering help, as she had with Kirkin. But Hinsuk confidently refused, bowing. The fairy asked Bobo to say goodbye to Hyun-sok, hinting that they would not see him for a long time. Hinseok himself, crying and feeling broken, complained that he only had 9,000 combat power, far from an ideal indicator for a commander. His tears and inner fear proved stronger than his determination, but fate demanded action. Hinsok has grown a lot, but the battalion commanders are on a completely different level. Their power is about 40,000. Hinseok admitted that he could never become that strong in a month, and dreamed that Bobo could fight in his place. The dog's power was truly enormous, and Bobo could have fought on equal terms with the battalion commander, or even won. But for this, the fight had to be a duel. Hinseok thought about the words, remembering what he was told about 1 month and the need to defeat the battalion commander. He realized that there was no talk of a fight. The fairy, noticing his thoughts, reminded him that this was precisely the task that lay before him. Hinseok came to the conclusion that the main thing is to simply defeat the opponent. By any means, sword, bow, arrows, bobo, or poison. The fairy asked if he had understood everything correctly. Hinseok planned to lure the commander out and set Bobo on him. This is the only way to victory. The fairy doubted, asking whether he was smart or just a coward. Hinseok, without losing his composure, replied that he was confident in his abilities, since he had recently met the commander. He had a magic supplement in his hands. The commander was a real pig who loved to eat deliciously. Here is a recipe for excellent braised uranium ribs that Hinseok cooked with great pleasure. First, the ribs need to be washed in water with honey to wash away all the blood. Once the blood has been removed, the meat is placed in a saucepan and boiled. After cooking, add thinly sliced single-eyed mushrooms and green onions. Mushrooms, with their fun, popping eye texture, add a 50 power. Then pour in water, add sugar, soy sauce, and garlic. A garlic drake that cries when its skin is peeled and has a potency of 80. Fermented fish with a strength of 30 is also added. Its exquisite juices are carefully squeezed out and mixed with the rest of the ingredients. All of this is thrown into the meat and brought to a boil, after which it is stewed for at least half an hour. The saints seem to be crying out to the heavens as Hinseok, barely able to stand on his feet, allowed Bobo to drag him across the floor. He couldn't understand why he lacked stamina so much. Deep down, it seemed like a shame. Bobo barked, expressing his concern, and the fairy suddenly shouted about a fire. At that moment, Hinseok felt the smell of tender, soft, and juicy Urin ribs filling the space. The ribs were ready. They were carefully placed on a plate, garnished with green onions, and the key to the battalion commander's heart was ready. The dish was complete. The table was well laid with a variety of dishes, and Doros, having settled himself comfortably, enjoyed the treat with a satisfied look. The taste was excellent, and he noted to himself how long it had been since he had eaten anything so delicious. He praised the idea of giving Uzar to Hinsoku, considering it brilliant, and did not fail to once again admire his own foresight. At this time, a goblin entered the hall and reported that the chef had arrived. Doros immediately cut off that he was not going to return Uzara. However, the goblin explained that this was not what he had come for. He wanted to personally express his gratitude by preparing a special dish. This piqued Doros's interest. He had heard that this same guy was considered a real culinary talent, and he became curious as to how true it was. He gave permission to enter. The doors swung open, and Hinseok entered the hall with a solemn air, holding a covered tray in his hands and a rose clenched in his teeth. His appearance was unexpected, but quite in the spirit of Hinseok. Loud, a little ridiculous, but memorable. Doros was surprised that he had not been warned in advance of the guest's intentions, but Hinseok quickly explained that he had come to express his gratitude for the support and the opportunity to prove himself in the kitchen. Apologizing for the delay, he explained that he had been busy all this time. Doros accepted the apology, and the room fell silent as Hinseok began to lift the lid of the tray. Hinseok admitted that his skills might not be enough, but he put some of his heart into the braised spare ribs he served. Doros noted that the aroma of the dish is indeed pleasant. He tried it and was immediately delighted. The taste was amazing. It was impossible to resist it. He was amazed that a man could prepare something so divine. Hinseok was relieved that the dish was to his taste, and expressed his desire to make Doros a taster of his new culinary creations. He happily agreed, warning that he would then drop by from time to time. Hinseok accepted this with a smile, and the fairy could barely contain her laughter as she watched what was happening. Doros praised him, adding that he now understood why the commander valued Hinseok so much. He replied that he would return to work in the kitchen, said goodbye, and left. Hinseok walked out of the building with Rachel, noting with frustration how complicated everything was. Rachel chuckled, noting that he didn't have such a small intestine after all. Hinseok explained that his plan was simple. He intends to fatten Doros up until he loses his guard, and then, at the right moment, get rid of him. A week passed. Doros had a new dish from Hinseok on his table, but for some reason the commander had no appetite. Tomorrow he would have to fight to confirm his title, and he could feel how people were looking at him now. As if you were looking at an important person whom you want to knock off his pedestal. In case of defeat, he would lose his position as battalion commander. He added ironically that even if he died from eating, his ghost would still remain charming. Hinseok realized at that moment that all his efforts over the past week could be in vain. He spent a lot of time and effort, but if Doros loses the fight, he himself loses his status, and there will be no point in eliminating him. Meanwhile, Doros approached Hinseok and invited him to a fight, calling him his lucky charm. Hinseok agreed and wished him victory. The next day, in the arena where the fight was to take place, the fairy tried to cheer up Hinseok. She suggested that perhaps Doros would suddenly show himself and become a commander at the level of the SSS. Hinseok was skeptical. According to him, Doros could barely walk after a week of fattening, and the chances of winning seemed negligible. The new host was announced on stage, the commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Demon King's army, Roig. The host invited the fighters into the arena. Doros, rising with difficulty, complained about the stairs leading to the center of the arena, and soon noticed Hinseok in the hall. He called it his lucky charm, to which Hinseok responded by wishing him luck. The fight began. The host was in a hurry. There was little time. When the fight started, the fighters clashed in a fierce battle. But suddenly, a powerful explosion thundered, and the shock wave reached the very rows of spectators. Even Hinseok didn't expect this. He was shocked by the force of the attack. The fairy screamed in surprise. The battle lasted only a moment, but the host was already announcing the result. Despite everything, Doros won. He was stronger than his opponent. Hinseok could only watch in complete bewilderment. That same night, at Bob's house, Hinsen sat on the floor, lost in thought. He clutched a map and a tattered encyclopedia of monsters in his hands, the fruits of his own observations and hunts. There was no longer a losing strategy. Bob alone was not enough, and Doros's strength exceeded all expectations. In front of him lay a map with marked habitats of particularly dangerous creatures. Every dot was carefully calibrated, every signature the result of personal experience, or the sacrifice of one of his former kitchen comrades. The territory where the Queen of the Talus lived, a monster capable of razing an entire squad to dust, stood out in particular. The fairy hovered nearby, worried by Hinseok's words about sacrifices, but he was focused. A new plan was forming in his head. It was impossible to defeat Doros in open combat, but if you turned the power of an even more destructive enemy against him, the chance of success increased. 3 days later, in the heart of the great forest, tensions reached their breaking point. The fairy, exhausted by constant memorization, could barely stay in the air. The encyclopedia of monsters turned out to be too extensive even for her. Having received the map, Hyunsok marked the first target. It was located only a kilometer from the current position. The creature was described as being like a massive worm, and everything pointed to a syrphid. In ancient Roman, it was called a forest worm. The list also included the morspid and Yastunbia, similar species, but the syrphid was less aggressive and, as a rule, did not enter into battle first. Rachel proudly summed up her knowledge, reminding with undisguised self-satisfaction that she had completed the task perfectly. Hinseok agreed reservedly. Sometimes even a fool can be useful, or so he thought. When one of the goblins asked if the hunting spot had been chosen, Hinseok confidently pointed out the direction to move straight ahead. Hinseok approached Rachel with a question about a demon that resembled a dragon with steel scales. She thought about it, because there are many such creatures, and without a clear description, it is difficult to say for sure. Soon, they will have to face him. Hinseok changed the plan. The cook squad received new orders. No captures, all loot in place. For the first time in a long time, the goblins who served in the squad were happy with the opportunity to simply hunt and eat their fill. Their cries and laughter filled the forest. Everything seemed to be going well. The hunt was successful. Meat was plentiful. But Hinseok's feeling of unease didn't go away. He looked around the thicket with concern. Everything was going too smoothly. Where is the owner of this territory? Did the plan fail? He ordered to stop everything, to lay down arms, and light a fire for cooking. As soon as the subordinates began to carry out the order, the forest suddenly came to life. A low, ominous sound was heard. The trees shook, and the birds took to the skies in panic. The fairy, frozen in the air, quietly said what Hinseok himself was already beginning to understand. He had appeared, the demon Nedrag. The demon's power was incomparable, and cries were heard all around. "Dragon, run!" Flames flared up everywhere, engulfing the forest. But Hinseok did not lose hope. He was sure that with the appearance of this creature, it was now possible to defeat Doros. A smile lit up his face. There was anxiety in Hemez's office. She expressed concern about the lack of news from Hinseok. It had been 3 weeks since he disappeared. Ridran apologized, but could not explain where the hero had disappeared to. Hemez suggested that perhaps the training was too difficult, and Hinseok simply got scared and ran away. However, Ridran insisted that the training was normal, and was surprised that Hinseok had recently become close to someone he called a pig. Hemez was puzzled. She had heard that instead of fighting, Hinseok became friends with the creature. At that moment, she realized that Hinseok had his own plan. There was a mountain of dirty dishes in Doros's office. He himself was enjoying a piece of grilled meat and thanked Hinseok for the food. Hinseok sighed heavily, feeling the weight of his problems. Doros noticed his anxiety and asked what happened. Hinseok said that today would most likely be the last time he would bring food. After all, the commander demands to taste the meat of a special monster, strong and indomitable. Despite days of constant fighting, the cooks have failed to defeat the beast, and their ranks are dwindling. Doros thought about it. He had heard that the number of wounded cooks was growing, but he had never met the marble monster and doubted its existence. Hinseok persistently confirmed the information. which prompted Doros to offer to help with his soldiers. However, even with 100 additional warriors, defeating the monsters seemed impossible. But Hinsok believed that if the great Doros took up the matter, the monster would be defeated in a few minutes, and the commander would definitely appreciate such a feat. Doros immediately imagined the commander praising him, imagining her warm words and affectionate addresses. In his dreams, he saw his commander calling him sweet and appreciating his exploits. Hinseok said with confidence that he would definitely tell the commander everything because they were close. Doros, a little hesitant but not wanting to back down, agreed to help. After all, they were friends. He shook Hinsoku's hand, confirming his decision. Hinseok was sincerely grateful and glad that he could count on support. The very next day, at a pre-arranged location, Hinseok stood before his subordinates, ready for new actions. Rachel reminded Hinsoku about the map, and he confidently confirmed that he was now like a walking navigator. Hinsok gave clear instructions to Boba and Uzar. They were going to catch the pig. Boba responded with a bark, and Uzaru immediately got to work, realizing that this was an order for meat. Hinseok encouraged the team and got them ready to set off. At this point, a system window appeared with the mission Pig Hunt and the promised reward in the form of possible promotions, ready to begin. Deep in the great forest, the goblins whispered among themselves, not fully understanding where they were heading. One of them noted with surprise that the detachment even had a commander, while the other replied that the chief had ordered them to destroy some particularly strong monster. Doros, looking around the surrounding area with displeasure, grumbled about how ugly it was here. He impatiently turned to Hinseok, asking how much longer they had to go. He calmly replied that they had almost reached the marble monster's territory. Hinseok watched his surroundings carefully, keeping in mind that the fat man might be much more dangerous than he looked. He took 500 soldiers with him in advance, hoping that Nedrak's power would be enough. At that moment, the birds became alarmed and flew up from the trees, a harbinger of the approach of something big. Hinsok noted that the enemy seemed to be already nearby. Doros became wary, and upon hearing confirmation that it was indeed a marble monster in front of them, he tensed up even more. He noted that the creature seemed familiar to him, and speculated that the monster might be an ancient species similar to the Nedrak. Hinsok insisted that all such creatures have common features. Doros agreed, but expressed confidence. A monster is a monster, and his battalion will cope with it. He asked Hinsoka to be sure to report his feat to the commander. Hinsok confirmed, and at Doros's signal, the soldiers rushed into battle. The battle continued deep into the forest, accompanied by the roar of footsteps, the clanging of weapons, and furious cries. The troops closed in on the marble monster. Doros continued the fight with a fierce determination, his attacks raining down one after another like a hailstorm. It seemed like he had no intention of stopping until he destroyed the marble monster. Hinsok, watching what was happening, began to realize that the situation was getting out of control. Instead of being exhausted, Doros demonstrated ever greater strength, skillfully covering himself with his soldiers, which took the blows on themselves, creating an opportunity for him to strike back. The original plan failed. Hinsok had expected attrition and chaos, but Doros proved far more effective than expected. Meanwhile, one of the goblins burst into the ranks, shouting and waving his arms. Everyone realized a new threat was approaching. Panic began to spread among the fighters. Another monster appeared in the forest. It was Surfib, a creature that, by all accounts, should not have been in this part of the territory. Hinsok initially did not perceive the new monster as a threat. He considered it harmless. However, he perceived what was happening as a struggle for territory and, taking advantage of the chaos, appeared to reclaim his place. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. Doros, realizing the scale of the disaster, ordered everyone to retreat, realizing that there were not enough forces for two fronts. The fairy turned to Hinsok in a panic. begging him to stop Doros. Retreat could mean the failure of the entire operation. Hyun-sok cursed internally and realized that he had no choice. It was time to take a risk. He called out to Doros, who, hearing Hyun-sok's voice, indicated that he too had realized the essence of what was happening. All the monsters were flocking to this place. Hyun-sok used the Ridran fighting style, a form that allows for lightning-fast destruction. In response to the remark, Hyun-sok irritably hit Doros. Trying to rouse his fighting spirit, he cancelled the order to retreat. He shouted a new order: fight to the end. The goblins were running around in confusion, screaming and yelling, not knowing what to do. Some began to panic. The atmosphere was filled with despair and fear. Doros could not believe the betrayal. He felt pain, heard screams. Everything inside him was torn apart. He felt abandoned, betrayed by someone he considered an ally. Fury and rage boiled within him. It was beyond his comprehension that a mere man would dare to do such a thing. Hyun-sok's words sounded like a challenge to him. The battle was entering a new phase. A magical glow flared up near Doros. He moved to the next level, activating full bloom. The energy radiating from his body increased dramatically, and his face twisted in rage. He was ready to risk everything just to destroy Hyun-seok. Hyun-seok didn't expect such force. He barely managed to jump away from the first blow, feeling the ground beneath him open up. A huge crater formed around Doros, a result of the monstrous power of his skill. The situation was getting out of control. Hyun-seok almost died under another wave of energy. Doros was suffocating, coughing up blood. The battle took an unexpected turn. Hyun-seok began to panic. He looked around for his comrades. Bob and Uzaru were nowhere to be seen. The fairy reported with alarm that they seemed to have come under attack from Surfib. There was no other way out. Hyun-seok had to fight Doros alone. Meanwhile, Doros, maddened with rage, continued to advance, shouting Hyun-seok's name through a bloody cough. Hyun-seok realized that he needed to buy himself some time. He called out to Rachel sharply and demanded the data from the map, the same information she had previously memorized. Rachel got her bearings and pointed in the right direction. A little to the left, at 11 o'clock along the front line, there was a den of war dogs. Having received the coordinates, Hyun-seok, without wasting a second, jumped up and rushed away, hoping to direct the monsters towards the enemy and thereby save himself. Doros raced after him, not hiding his rage. His anger burst forth in a roar and hoarse breathing. He demolished everything in his path. Hyun-seok ran forward, looking back only out of the corner of his eye. He knew that if these were normal monsters, they would probably avoid Doros. But in this territory, everything was different. Here were nests, offspring, an instinctively protected area. Doros was furious. He no longer perceived what was happening as a battle. It had become personal for him. This audacity made him furious, almost delighted. He knew he would catch up. He knew he would destroy. At that moment, his body flared up again. Energy rushed out. Doros reached the third level of awakening. Falling flowers. Hyun-seok felt the air around him become heavier. There was nowhere else to retreat. The power that emanated from him truly seemed limitless, the embodiment of all destructive power. But suddenly, the flow of energy began to weaken. He froze in place, feeling his strength begin to fade. Too much had been spent during the previous hunt, and now the body was failing. His body stopped obeying. His magical resources were depleted before his eyes. He could not continue. Hyun-seok, noticing this, reacted immediately. He rushed forward, preparing to strike. Hyun-seok didn't let it end that easily. He activated one of the highest forms of the Ridran style, the seventh, the blast wave. But Doros, despite his weakness, raised his shield. His eyes were full of malice and a promise of revenge. He was going to return. But now he was retreating. The air shook. A flash of light illuminated the forest, and the forces collided. Doros's shield held. Meanwhile, Hemis watched the proceedings, her expression growing colder with each passing moment. She asked what all the commotion was about in front of her castle. For her, everything that was happening was a confirmation of Doros's weakness. A commander who allowed himself to be brought to his knees by some lone hero. She no longer felt respect or patience. One final blow echoed through the surrounding area. The wave of force sent Hyunsuk flying backwards, slamming him into a tree, stunned. But he stood up, his breathing ragged, his body covered in scratches, but his eyes full of determination. Depressed, defeated, and humiliated, Doros begged for salvation. But Hemis had already made up her mind. Her voice was cold and cutting, like ice. She stopped fighting. Hyunsuk, taking advantage of the confusion, rushed forward again. His strike was accurate. He had proven everything he needed to prove, both to his commander and to himself. At that moment, drops of blood splashed onto Hemis's face. She didn't react. She just stood there, silently watching history change its heroes. Hemis smiled, reminding him of the bet they had made. She invited Hensok to follow her, for they were to have a conversation. She mentioned Sir Fib, whose appearance came as a surprise even to her. Hensok confirmed that he himself had not expected such a powerful creature to fly out onto the field in the midst of the battle. Hemis laughed. She was amazed at how sophisticated his plan was, and expressed a desire to peer into his mind to understand how he came up with all this. But he refused. This only amused her. He was using her own tricks against her. A trick that she liked. Although she didn't approve of this approach, Hyunsuk's success could not be denied. Next time, she would formulate her orders more clearly. Hyunsuk agreed without objection, but Hemis added that there might not be a next time. If he decides to act so deviously and go beyond the limits of what is acceptable again, the consequences will be much harsher. Hyunseok understood. Hensok lay on the floor of Bob's house, realizing how lucky he was to have survived the last battle. Hensok reported that Doros has the ability to polymorph. He can change forms and become stronger with each transformation. To Rachel, it seemed like a special demonic art. She was intrigued by the idea of asking the cow's head about it. Boba, although he didn't speak, seemed to understand the situation, and Hyunsuk noted that he also had a hard time with the many monsters. At the same time, the commander coped with all the difficulties, which earned respect. Hyunsuk even expressed some pity for Doros, calling him a not-bad pig. The fairy reminded that Hyunsuk could appropriate points for himself, stealing the last punches from his opponents, for which he apologized, although it was clear that the apology was not entirely sincere. The fairy mockingly demanded that he remove his hand from his face so that he could see the grin. He, in turn, thought about how much his level had increased after everything that had happened. Hyunsuk opened the status window and studied his stats with interest. His role was defined as a hero candidate, with a level of 420. However, strange squares and question marks appeared on the screen, which left him confused. Perhaps it was a system error or hidden parameters. Rachel asked in surprise if Hyunsuk was hallucinating. Rachel insisted the system wasn't wrong, suspecting that he was just making fun of her. Hyunsuk waved his hand, deciding not to focus on it. Rachel suggested that they stop talking and test Hyunsuk's combat prowess, and celebrate his level 48. Hyunsuk agreed, and he looked with interest at the data in the magic glasses. The hero's power was 13,936. Quite impressive. He noticed that just recently he had been powerless even against a simple goblin. Rachel smiled as she admitted that she had been planning a surprise for him. Raising a huge mug, she proposed to drink to their further strengthening and success. They raised their glasses and agreed with the toast. They drank to the day when they would finally cut off the Demon King's head, to wealth, honor, and glory. Each day of Chue followed a schedule. The larger part was sleep, training, hunting, cooking, and the smaller part was rest, lunch, preparation. Chue and Boba moved in the same circle. He thought that despite the growth of strength, one should not neglect everyday affairs. The thought flashed through his head that after training he could drop in on Mrs. Evelson, since he still had questions. At that moment he heard a voice and noticed that they had arrived a bit early. It was Lord Redran, who congratulated Hensok on his victory over Doros. Hyunsok thanked him and immediately wanted to ask a question about the battle. Hensok asked if Redran was familiar with the technique of promotion. Redran was surprised and replied that it was an ancient, informal fighting style. He clarified that usually combat is divided into formal movements and informal ones, based on changing the body or weapons. Redran noted that informal ones have fewer variations than formal ones. He added that special fighting styles are rare, and informal ones are passed down from generation to generation even more secretly. Hinseok realized that there was a difference between attack skills and enhancement skills. Redran's style is an enhancement skill. Redran added that any demon who possesses demonic ki can master it, but due to the serious side effects, few dare to do so. Hinseok wondered if he could enhance this increase since he had demonic ki. Redran noticed that the ki had accidentally ended up in Hinseok's body and warned him of its danger, to which Hinseok replied that there shouldn't be any serious problems, and in the worst case, Mrs. Evelson will help them. Redran warned Hinsoka not to push himself to extremes. Hinseok was surprised and thought that without a promotion he would not survive. He decided to take a risk and asked permission to try just once, since it was his body. Redran agreed, although he felt a little awkward. He reminded that a promise was a promise and suggested that Hinseok watch carefully to begin the process. In the underground prison of the cathedral, chained to the wall, was Prince Sir Geffion. The man at the bars asked him if he was awake, and noted that he had long wondered whose hands were involved in his capture. It turned out to be the Pope's. Geffion recalled that he had been told that he was no longer needed, and asked why they had come now. The man replied that he wanted to give her a chance to make amends, because everyone is equal before God. Geffion asked what needed to be done. He was ordered to get rid of Evelson Marriott. Geffion was surprised, asking if this could not be done without, and why the order had changed. The man replied that the deaths of the Holy Church were not explained, and that it was none of his business. Geffion noted that there was a devourer there, but Dad promised that if he went there again, he would assign 4 knights, and there would be no devourer. He warned Geffion not to lose, because the path to glory does not tolerate defeat. The saint cried out fervently to Hinsoku, urging him to come to his senses. He was seriously wounded, foaming at the mouth. He was in critical condition. The saint did not hold back her indignation. They had both gone crazy. A man was practicing a technique that was only available to demons. According to Redran, he himself claimed that everything was fine, since a lot of time had passed, and there should have been almost no demonic ki left in his body. The saint sharply objected. "You are not priests. How can you decide what is necessary and what is not, if you do not even understand this?" She reported that she had unlocked the demonic energy within Hinseok, whereas they simply released her, hoping to take control. Redran asked what would happen to Hinseok now. The saint explained that he would not survive long in this condition, and since it is too late to restrain the released Qui, she will try to force the body to accept this power. Her plan is to compress the demonic energy with divine energy, distributing it evenly throughout her body, by turning it into a concentrated force that the body can handle. It would be like building up a resistance to poison. Redran asked, "Is such a thing even possible?" The saint didn't know. She had never done such a thing before, because such a thing had never happened before. There is a possibility that the demonic key may not accept the divine power, and then it will rebel. This could destroy him from the inside. But if other options lead to an even worse outcome, you should at least try. The saint knelt down next to Hinseok's body. The holy light flowed through her fingers, penetrating Hinseok's body. Hinseok woke up in bed. He opened his eyes and felt like he was missing something. A fairy appeared next to him, expressing joy at his awakening. Bobo also jumped onto the bed, rejoicing. 3 days passed. He could barely remember what had happened, only that he had tried to use the promotion, and then everything had fallen apart. It seemed as if his soul was leaving his body. He immediately opened the status window. My gaze caught on a line that previously contained incomprehensible symbols. Now it displayed demonic energy. The error disappeared. Himis entered the room. She looked pleased, but her words were reproachful. The commander knew that he was using demonic ki despite being human. She wondered why he hadn't told her about it. She thought it was funny. Hyunsuk just laughed. Hensok sat on the bed, still not fully recovered. Himis watched him with her usual mocking grin. She noted that the saint had worked on it, and acknowledged that she was truly worthy of her title. The result was quite good. But she immediately added that the ending of this whole story turned out to be boring and sad. She decided to intervene herself. According to her, now she will help him, not out of duty, but of her own free will. She called him her personal aunt, which was interesting to watch, and suggested that he consider it an honor. After these words, without warning, she directed her power straight at Hyunsuk. He shouted, calling out to her, but she only grinned, reassuring Ridran, "Everything will be fine. He will wake up after sleep." Having said this, she left the room. They had to return to the office. The Demon King had suddenly called her, which meant that Ridran had a new assignment. Several days passed. There was silence in Bob's house, broken only by voices from the room where the treatment was being completed. The saint finished another session and said that that was all for today. Hyunsuk felt deep gratitude and sincerely thanked her for her daily care and help. The saint replied that it was not so important. According to her, it was his will to live that saved him that time. He was her only hope, she muttered. Hyunsuk became wary and asked again what she had said, but she evaded the answer, saying that that was all for today, and hurried away. He remained a stranger in this world, and all he could do was wait. Hope that one day she would tell him everything herself. Ridran, noticing Hinsok's persistence, nevertheless agreed to teach him the theory of dark mana management, but warned him not to overexert himself. Hinseok assured him that he felt fine. 3 days had passed. According to the saint, there was no threat if the energy was not used. Ridran also noted that Mrs. Himez had left exactly 3 days ago. However, a doubt began to creep into his mind. Perhaps there was something more behind her departure than just the annual meeting of the Cowden clan in the Demon King's castle. Although this event was held regularly, lost in thought, he didn't immediately notice Hinsok calling him. Ridran apologized and explained that he had gotten distracted. Hinseok noticed that he had been given too many responsibilities lately due to the absence of his commander, and offered his help. But Ridran refused. The commander will return soon. She was simply called earlier than usual, so there is nothing special about it. Ridran told Hensok to focus on himself, and not to worry about him. Hensok respectfully agreed, and bowed. Ridran noted that Hensok was becoming stronger every day, and thanks to the dark mania, his body was developing faster than usual. Once he masters the control of energy, the growth will be significant. Meanwhile, Hyunsuk, holding the bump on his forehead. Ridran noticed a strange glow, the light of divine power. It was something new, not related to holy magic. Ridran immediately felt the presence of an unknown force and became alarmed. Perhaps someone had broken in, an intruder with divine energy. Riedran hurried to check what was happening, leaving Hensok in place. At the same time, 4 people in robes were quietly walking down the corridor. Getting into the castle turned out to be easier than they expected. The absence of a devourer made the task easier. One of them, Geffen, asked to speak more quietly. Although the devourer was gone, there was still one called the Red Nightmare in the castle, and the Red Nightmare appeared right in front of them. Riedran blocked the way. He immediately realized that these people knew about the absence of Hemis and asked a question. They recognized him and screamed in panic, but Geffen kept his cool and gave the order to his companions. Lucas and Nell were to go after the saint. The rest were to contain the Red Nightmare. Riedran understood why they had come. Their goal was Evelison, and her room was right next door. Riedran knew that it would not be difficult to deal with 4 opponents, but they were divided, and this complicated the task. At that moment, a familiar voice came from around the corner. Hyun-sok had come to the rescue despite the ban. He screamed, worried about Riedran's condition. Riedran cursed silently, but immediately realized that his appearance was for the best. He quickly gave orders. Hyun-sok was to immediately find the saint and take her to a safe place. As proof of the legitimacy of his actions, Riedran threw him a necklace, an artifact confirming his authority. Hensok caught the necklace and asked what to do with it. Riedran explained, "Use it as evidence when meeting with others." Hensok, quickly realizing, nodded and rushed away. Gaffion tried to stop him by shouting at his subordinates, but Riedran stood in his way, declaring that no one could take the saint without Commander Hemis's permission. The fight began. Riedran activated his fighting style, Form 7, Blast Wave. His eyes glowed blood red, foreshadowing a storm. A new quest appeared in the system, and Hinseok quickly realized its importance, rushing to the saint's room. The mission was simple and direct. Protect Saint Evelisa Marriott from weak attackers ready to kill her. The system received information about the reward, 1,000 hero points, which seemed like a surprisingly high amount. Hinseok wondered what was really going on and why this particular mission was so expensive. He loudly warned the saint about the attack and the need for immediate departure. The saint didn't know the details of what was happening. Hyun-sok warned that the attackers were the same ones who had tried to harm them before. The sword scraped across the concrete floor, and the screams of the intruders were heard. The guards at the saint's room stood to the death, following the order of Lord Riedran, not to let the enemy pass further. The people in robes approached, and the guards shouted at the saint to run away. Hyun-sok grabbed the saint's hand, but she asked him to wait, and he paused for a moment, then lifted her into his arms. At the headquarters of the 3rd Corps of the Demon King's army, Commander Roigo expressed dissatisfaction, wondering how it was possible to lose to some man. Hemis hoped that everything would be under control in her absence, and asked Roigo if he could handle it. Roigo asked why he should be the one responsible for this. The meeting ended there. Suddenly, a goblin burst into the room with an urgent report. The chef announced that the chef was here. He has Lord Riedran's necklace, and the people have attacked the castle with the intention of killing the saint. Roigo was perplexed by this news, trying to understand what was really going on. Roigo went out into the corridor. In front of him stood Hyun-sok and Saint. Hyun-sok asked if he was the regiment commander, to which Roigo answered in the affirmative and demanded an explanation. Hensok said that Lord Riedran suddenly felt a divine power, and then people broke into the castle with the intention of killing the saint. Roigo was surprised and asked why they needed this. Then, to calm down, he suggested taking a deep breath and explaining the situation clearly. Suddenly, Roigo shouted for everyone to duck. He sensed something was wrong. The people did attack, and they needed the saint. He ordered the signal fires to be lit and to protect her. Despite all the confusion, Roigo knew that the threat was real and that people were indeed trying to kill the saint. Glass shards flew everywhere. Roigo ordered to protect the saint and activated the power of binding. He intended to prevent the enemy from advancing any further. Hensok shouted loudly about Riedren's fighting style. The seventh form and a blast wave went out. He promised to protect Lady Evelisa. The prince bitterly recalled how he lost his faithful friend, Orca, whom he used as a shield. Despite everything, the enemy's strength was obvious, a combination of divine and demonic power, at a level no lower than that of a unit commander. Riedren noted that it was this power that caused people to worship heroes. The Red Nightmare, who had long frightened everyone, turned out to be an ordinary demon. The prince knew of his inevitable defeat, but he took the fight with gusto. He understood that without the Devourer, the fortress was vulnerable, and he tried to buy time, relying on his comrades, who would quickly deal with low-level enemies. Riedren wondered how much information had leaked to the enemy. Riedren interrupted his thoughts, stating that time was short, and suggested that they finish the fight as quickly as possible. Geffen was doubtful, asking how this was possible. Riedren was not beyond his abilities. Riedren confidently stated that true strength is capable of overcoming any obstacles. The fighter noted that the Demon King's army had never seen a hero, and he was surprised that there were 3 people there at once: the saint, the traitor, and himself. Hensok warned that an entire army would soon arrive at the fortress, and no matter how strong the enemy was, there would be no way to stand against the army. He advised not to waste his strength in vain and to surrender. The hero, however, doubted the defeat, wondering how the man could master the fighting style of Riedren. Roigo noted that thanks to this he was able to catch the enemy. The man in the robe turned to the Lord with a request to grant him the strength to destroy evil, and the robe around him burst into flames, the fire of divine power that burns one's own body. Roigo was amazed. Only high-ranking holy knights used such a receiver, and even the strongest demons cannot withstand such fire. The hero called for surrender and handing over the saint, saying that ordinary people and demons would burn from touching the wall of fire. Hensok, surprised, asked why people would kill the saint if Mrs. Evelson was on their side. The saint replied that the Holy Empire had long ago abandoned God. All that matters to them is silent submission to the puppet, regardless of whether it is actually a saint or not. The sword scraped the concrete floor. The piercing sounds of battle were heard. Geffen wearily interrupted the emotions, declaring that it was time to stop pouring out tearful speeches, and he addressed the hero with a final warning. 10 seconds to think. Hensok counted the seconds, realizing that time was short, and there was only one way: to use dark mana. He started counting from 10, feeling his body tense and tired, but his determination was stronger than the pain. By the time there were 9 seconds left, he was already aiming for a boost. First, the first level of bloom. The saint tried to stop him, warning him about the weakness of his body, but Hensok was adamant. After all, death was inevitable if he did nothing. Moving on to the second level, full bloom, the fear and pain intensified. Memories of Riedren's words echoed in his head. The rise goes through 3 stages: flowering, full bloom, and the fall of flowers. And each subsequent one is more dangerous than the previous one. It is forbidden to move on to the next stage without full control. My heart felt like it was breaking. Every cell in my body was screaming to stop. The fairy desperately screamed at him not to do this, begging him to concentrate because his body might not be able to withstand it. But Hensok was already on the threshold of the 3rd stage, falling flowers. Rachel supported him with buffs, not allowing his spirit to drop. At that moment, it became clear that a person capable of using such a technique of enhancement was far from an ordinary hero. It is significantly higher than this level. Hensok shouted with determination, "Let's go!" and rushed into battle. Their clash was intense, with Hensok's body becoming covered in black spots. a sign of the third level of enhancement, which did not go unnoticed by the saint. He could not understand how a human could master a demonic technique, but he was sure that it was only temporary. The blows followed one after another. Hyun-sok parried the attacks, swords with surprising ease, deflecting the blows almost effortlessly. Thoughts flashed through the saint's head. He had never met such an opponent. But suddenly he felt a sharp blow to his chest and grabbed it, accusing Hyun-seok of dirty tricks and condemning him for his connection with demons. Hyun-seok felt his strength was running out, but he refused to give up, remembering the saint. Riedren's words, a warning that promotion was a limitation, and that if you overdid it, you might not recover, were spinning around in his head. Despite this, he was ready to continue. Before Hyun-seok's eyes stood the image of a silver-haired beauty, crying from worry. The internal question of whether he could die remained unanswered, because the decision had been made. He went on the attack, no matter what. Hyun-seok's body was already at its limit, and his thoughts left no doubt. Even if he stopped, it would be impossible to recover. There was no turning back. All that was left was to go to the end. The saint warned that dark mana and divine power are opposites, and if he now uses divine energy after dark, the body may explode. The saint's prayers called upon the Lord to prevent this. Hyun-seok used the Riedren fighting style, a style that was both graceful and deadly. The enemy was surprised. There was a clear danger to life in this. The first form, instant destruction, was chosen for the attack. Hyun-seok rushed forward, swinging his fist, blazing with energy, and Geffen smirked, underestimating his opponent. However, Hyun-seok did not stop and carried out another powerful energy strike. He used the combo strike form of the Riedren fighting style. The hero was surprised. Hyun-seok didn't just use two different techniques, he changed them in battle, which was extremely unusual. A huge flash lit up the sky, piercing the roof of the castle, and Geffen fell to the ground with his mouth open, shocked. Hyun-seok stood over his fallen enemy, and at that moment the fairy and the saint simultaneously called out his name. The saint grabbed Hyun-seok tightly, supporting his weakened body, and he slowly sank to the cold floor. He was barely breathing, she whispered anxiously. At that moment, a revived opponent appeared next to him. His voice was cold and stern. He had underestimated Hyun-seok, that unusual man. If he survives, he will become a threat to the entire empire. So we must finish him off. But suddenly, Riedren appeared, grabbed the saint by the head, lifted him sharply into the air, and threw him away with force. He apologized to Hyun-seok for being late, his voice heavy. He turned to the saint and noted that Hyun-seok had still used his fighting style. Will the saint be able to save him? Riedren wondered, watching his friend anxiously. She will do everything in her power, she replied. Lord Hyun-seok, please don't die. It's not time yet, she begged. There was a light, almost playful atmosphere at the table with teas and cakes. Hemis was in the Demon King's castle in the waiting room. During the annual commanders' meeting, she jokingly noted that she had come all this way for such humble desserts. Her companion advised her to simply eat when they give her food, without making unnecessary claims. The commander of the Demon King's army's 4th Corps, Park Hyuna, the former heroine, added that she was a devourer. Hemes responded by reminding him that she could have killed Hemes many times during that time if it weren't for the existing ban on fighting between corps commanders. Mrs. Hemes was interrupted by a hamster who burst into the room with an urgent message. The Gatran Empire has launched an attack on the Black Fortress. Among the attackers were 4 knights, including 1 hero. Many of the fortress's soldiers were killed or wounded. Hemes was surprised by this turn of events. The annual meeting of the commanders decided to proceed differently, and at that very moment, the people suddenly attacked. It seemed an incredible coincidence, which she could not help but note with barely concealed irony, addressing those present. Hyun-seok realized with surprise that he had survived again, feeling a mixture of relief and joy. The fairy was clearly irritated by his frivolity, even trying to grab him by the hair, and he exclaimed in response that he was a patient. The pain in his body only proved that he was alive, although it felt like he had no strength left. The fairy reminded that the enemy also survived a direct attack, and Hyun-suk lost. But suddenly the cow's head intervened and he was saved. After this, the cow's head and the saint took turns looking after him. Bobo and the fairy also kept an eye on things whenever possible. They, like others, considered his vitality a real miracle and asked not to take such reckless risks, because the fairy was afraid of an imminent heart attack. Hyun-suk pointed at the fairy with a smile and admitted that she was right. The fairy softened, and the atmosphere became friendly and warm. He stroked her head and asked for forgiveness for making her worry. Hyun-suk praised Rachel. Several hours later, Ridrin noted that Hyosok had survived not because of his own powers, but because of the dark mana that Lady Hemis had invested in him. Hyun-suk agreed. Ridrin asked not to repeat such madness again. Ridrin reminded him that he had no extra lives, and without Hemis's help, he would have died long ago. Hyun-suk, tired of the warnings, asked to stop, and Hemis, hugging Bob, admitted that she herself was already bored. When Hyun-seok asked about the results of the meeting, Hemis sarcastically replied that her subordinates had been beaten up at her headquarters and she didn't care about the meeting. Hemis simply ran away from there, which greatly surprised Hyun-suk. She noted that the Demon King was probably furious right now. Hyun-suk and Ridrin were confused, but Hemis knew that wasn't the most important thing right now. Although Hemis was going to transfer her mana, it turned out that a person who was only at the level of a company commander was able to use this mana as his own. Ridrin asked if this would cause problems for the Demon King, and Hyun-suk was also worried if everything would really be okay. Hems found Hyun-suk to be a funny person. Hemis reminded Milord that from the very beginning of their invasion of this world, she had always followed his will, because she understood what he was trying to protect. The Demon King Tegrad asked what this was about. Hemes insisted he was crossing a line. He called her arrogant and suggested that she was preparing for a rebellion, wondering if longevity had made her a primitive creature. Hems had anticipated this reaction and, not wanting to get into an argument, decided to leave. Hemis questioned whether she had truly become boring, urging her to think about it carefully. She gave one last piece of advice as a comrade with whom she had gone a long way, and said goodbye. Hesuk, bowing, wished a good journey in the third building, Bob's house. Hemis then congratulated Ridrin, reminding him that he had single-handedly defeated the human hero, and she suggested thinking about moving up to a higher position. Ridrin replied that he was not ready for that yet, because he wanted to watch Hyun-suk grow and continue learning from Hemis. Hemis smiled back. Hems noted that the castle was currently in disarray due to the human invasion. Ridrin admitted that he had no excuse for what was happening. Hemis explained that everyone was united because the fortress was far from the front. She suggested holding a tournament to select a new commander for the 3rd Battalion. Hyun-suk thought for a moment, then said that after upgrading the hero's shop to the average level, he had 950 points left, and it would be wasteful to spend them uselessly. He specified that after completing the quest, he earned a total of 1,000 points, and I noted that there really are more useful items and new categories in the store now. Hyun-suk was looking at the hero shop and noticed a medium armor that cost 700 hero points. It protected the body, but it didn't give any bonuses. He doubted whether it was worth spending points on such armor. The fairy supported his thoughts. Hyun-suk suggested first improving the combat power detector. He bought a special scanner for 150 hero points, which shows the strength, endurance, agility, and magical abilities of the target. Then he noticed the skill and magic creation, an item worth 500 hero points, and wondered what it was. The fairy explained that it was possible to turn a common action, such as a kick, into a unique skill and improve it while preserving the essence. This required a certain cost, 500 hero points, which were written off from the balance. The recording process then began, with the system monitoring Hyunsuk's mana flow and physical parameters for the selected time. The user could manually set the start and end of the recording, which allowed the essence of the technique to be captured as accurately as possible. Hyunsuk, watching the process, was surprised at how advanced the technology was behind it, optimizing the balance of power and mana control, as well as the finishing touches, turned an ordinary move into a polished combat skill. Hyunsuk was shocked and angry. He tried to do everything exactly as instructed, but the system suddenly gave an error and refused to create the skill. It turned out that the reason was in the user himself. The dark mana he used prevented the system from recognizing him as a normal hero. The fairy explained that the hero protection system simply does not accept bugged users with demonic energy. Hyunsuk, angry, grabbed the fairy and began shaking her, trying to figure out what else could go wrong. A new notification popped up on the screen, leaving him tense and waiting. The system issued a task, reminding Hyunsuk about the loss of hero points and suggesting not to despair, but to create a unique skill to earn them again. Hyunsuk was furious, demanding his points back, but he knew he had to move forward. On the training ground, he stood before Ridrin, begging for help. Ridrin listened carefully and thought about the offer to help create the skill. Ridrin agreed to help and reminded them of the training planned for today. They immediately began training. The training was long and exhausting for Hyunsuk. After the first day, he lay exhausted on his bed, but was happy with his success. The system notified about the task completion. Hyunsuk accomplished a great feat by surpassing the limitations of an ordinary hero and going beyond the accepted norms. For this, he was given a special reward: 26,520 power and an unknown amount of additional power. Thus, his own skill was born, a modified version of Ridrin's martial arts called nobility. The day of the tournament arrived. Host Jark welcomed all the participants and spectators. The tournament was a large-scale event, where the commander of the 1st Battalion and the commander of the 13th Regiment were to be chosen. The number of participants exceeded 1,000. The tournament was divided into 3 stages, each of which was very different from the usual fights. The first stage, titled Oops, the knife accidentally slipped, Hyunsuk smiled. Or, the law of the highway, continued the host, was the killer run, and was supposed to start in an hour. Pakyun walked up to Hyunsuk and called out to him. She noticed his black hair and combat power meter, which at first glance made him look like an ordinary hero. However, Pakyun sensed dark mana within him and suspected him of being a spy. Ridrin intervened and asked Pakyun to step aside, announcing that he had orders from Commander Hems for the chef. Pakyun asked if the order applied to Hyunsuk and received confirmation from Ridrin. Pakyun shrugged and decided to leave, noting that she was bored anyway. She was surprised to see that Ridrin kept the man close not as food, but as a commander. She found this interesting. Despite her oddities, Pak Hyena remained the commander of the 4th Corps, and was previously a hero like Hyun-seok. Hyuna arrived on the orders of the Demon King to observe the tournament. However, Hemis believed it was a cover for surveillance. Hyunsuk began to suspect that there was something more behind the outward calm. Hyunsuk asked what order the commander had given. Ridrin explained with slight surprise, Hyunsuk had to make it into the final 8 of the tournament. Otherwise, he would be transferred to the 2nd building, where he would become a subject of research. 2 hours later, the tournament began. The rules of the first stage were simple. The participants had to run to the finish line. At the same time, the organizers announced that even if someone accidentally kills an opponent during the run, there will be no punishment. Hyun-seok heard the warning. Next to him was a smug member, a jerk who showed arrogance. Hyun-seok responded calmly. The signal to start sounded and the participants, including the goblins and Hyun-seok, rushed forward. A bat circled above the highway, deliberately dropping sharp stones from the sky. Hyun-seok commanded Rachel to activate the shield. He also asked to keep him updated on the situation ahead, to which the fairy replied that if they continued running at the same speed, they would be able to take 100th place. The goat running next to him tried to attack again, but the fairy successfully blocked the blow. Hyun-seok thanked her. The goat tried to use a new, more powerful technique. The flash of his attack turned bright red and took the shape of a ball, then transformed into cubes. Hyun-seok noticed that the attack weakened because the goat tried to split it. Hyun-seok mentally noted that goat's attack looked impressive, but it didn't pose much of a threat. The goat began shouting about a man who was allegedly using a long-range weapon, which caused confusion among the goblins. They suddenly changed their target and rushed towards Hyun-seok, whom they had previously ignored. The goat, pleased with the distraction, rushed forward, increasing the gap. Hyun-seok, angry at what was happening, sped up, while asking the fairy for data on his position in the race. The information received showed that he had already overtaken 76 participants, and there were 20 rivals left before the finish line. However, a sudden blow from the goblin threw him off balance, disrupting the pace and adding another layer of chaos to the proceedings. Hyun-seok remembered Riedren's warning that the fighting techniques he had learned were not suitable for the human body, because the techniques of promotion and combat were created for demons. This left him irritated and determined to create his own skills. Eventually, he managed to combine the dark mana he received from Lady Hemis with the magical power of humans, generating a unique skill, a modified version of Riedren's martial arts. The skill's color became purple, symbolizing nobility, and that was what he decided to name it. The hero's magic power has increased from D to C, and dark mana has increased from E to C. The system has announced the birth of a new skill, nobility, an ancient term meaning the birth of an aristocrat. This skill was based on the purple power that combined normal magic and dark mana, and was only mastered at 0.06%. Hyun-seok delivered a powerful blow to the goblin's face, activating the skill Nobility, first form King's Step. His body left behind a purple magical trail, accelerating sharply, leaving all his opponents far behind. The host announced that 95 participants had already reached the finish line, and there were only 5 free spots left. Hyun-seok rushed forward, overtaking almost everyone. The goat was amazed by such speed. Hyun-seok used Riedren's fighting style, third form, assault, and dealt a decisive blow to the goat, which flew back and crashed into the wall. The host announced the names of those who took 99th and 100th places, Holgot and Hyun-seok. The race ended, and 100 participants who successfully completed the first stage received the right to participate in the second round. After this, a 3-day break was announced. That same night, Park Hyun approached Hemis near the Black Fortress and asked if she really intended to free him during the tournament. Motham suddenly appeared and greeted Hemis, noting that she had not seen her for 97 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She asked how she could help. Motham was Hemis's familiar, and her power was 198,532. Motham asked if they should simply take away the flags from all participants. Hemis confirmed, but she warned not to overdo it, and to be softer with weaklings. Park Hyun doubted Hemis's softness, which surprised her. Hemis then explained why demons lose to humans. Demons fight too fairly and rely on brute force, and if defeated, death is inevitable. People can be cunning and leave the battlefield, which gives them an advantage. Hemis added that the Demon King continues to lose to the weaker race precisely because of these differences. And then she noted that someone should refresh their knowledge. The rules for the second stage included the formation of random groups of 4 participants, with each group given 2 flags. And after 48 hours, The 10 teams with the most flags advanced. Teams left without flags were disqualified. One of the participants suggested using a human as bait to defeat the others, to which Hyunsuk responded sarcastically. Hyunsuk wondered why he was on such a team. Team number 9 consisted of Holgat, Ikigle, Fedis, Choi, and Hyunsuk himself. One of the participants suggested waiting until the end of the round to move on. The remaining time is 25 minutes, 45 seconds. The tournament table of the second stage showed in 4th place, Team 9 with 4 flags. Suddenly, their team moved. After some time, the table was updated. 3rd place, with 4 flags. All the participants looked at the table in surprise, as their team had now risen to 3rd place. Hyunsuk heard the sound of metal ringing and was surprised to see Motum with a power of 198,532. Because of his appearance, the team's positions in the table began to change dramatically. The goat pointed at Motum and asked if he was the Golden Goblin. Hyunsuk warned them not to approach him or engage in combat, but the others disobeyed and began shouting for the flag. The goat attacked Motum, but suddenly blows were heard and all the participants flew to the sides. Motum found himself with the collected flags. Pakyun expressed doubt about the meaning of fighting him. She wondered if it was possible to resist such a strong opponent. Hemis was silent. There were 11 minutes, 32 seconds remaining. The tournament table showed Team 9 was in 25th place without flags. There were 59 seconds left until the end of the stage. Hyunsuk gathered his team for a decisive attack and especially targeted Goat to make him think with his head. He reminded them that he had already taken the enemy's flags. Motum considered it a primitive attack. Hyunsuk gave the order. The goat, reluctantly obeying, directed the magical energy. There was smoke in the air. Kigli, soaring like an eagle, swooped down. The double attack caught the enemy by surprise, the first time such a trick was used. Motum grabbed the eagle and felt invigorated. But he immediately noticed Hyunsuk approaching, making a direct, slow attack from the front. He thought that even the enemy's dark mana was extremely weak. Hyunsuk approached Motum, summoning a centipede, which suddenly burst out of the ground and attacked the enemy. Hyunsuk activated the first form of the skill Nobility, King's Step, and reached out his hand towards the flags, hoping to take them. Motum praised the teamwork, but noted their limitations and grabbed Hyunsuk's face. The fight began. 15 seconds remained. Motum noticed an unusual purple power in Hyunsuk's energy. With time rapidly running out, Hyunsuk decided to go all in and explode the dark mana. The flash blinded everyone around. The countdown reached 0, and the round ended. Motum thought that Hyunsuk wanted to self-destruct, but then noticed that a flag appeared in Goat's hands. Hyunsuk smiled, hinting that he had a well-thought-out plan and didn't rush into despair without preparation. Hyunsuk found the encounter with the opponent to be damn awful. The host announced that 7th place was shared by teams 15, 4, and 21. Hyunsuk decided not to cross paths with the Iron Man anymore. Team 9 rose to 2nd place. A new skill message has appeared. Dark Mana Burst, a technique that combines magic and the properties of dark mana. The user collides human and dark mana inside the body, then releases a powerful explosion outward. The proficiency rate for this skill was 0.11%. Choi Hyung-seok is a unique hero who combines human nature and dark mana, making him unusual and unpredictable. His talent, speed, courage, and prudence make him stand out even among demons. Such a character is a sign of coming changes, and judging by Hemez's reaction, these changes promise to be significant and interesting. The winds of change are indeed felt, and they could overturn the established order. The Holy Empire of Gatran is going through a difficult period. The defeat of Sergefen was a serious blow. The Holiness decided to strip Evilson Marriott of her status as the next saint, accusing her of heresy, and colluding with the Demon King's army, which will only exacerbate internal conflicts. At the same time, the Devourer reorganizes his army and command, using the tournament as a means to select the best officers, which creates a serious threat. The attempt to establish cooperation with the Demon King has proven unsuccessful, and this foreshadows new difficulties and conflicts for the Empire. It seems that the balance of power is beginning to waver, and a struggle is coming not only on the battlefield, but also for power and influence. The Holy Father is considering recruiting Lord Kingly, one of his heroes who can stand against the Devourer. However, the situation is complicated by the fact that the traitor Pak Hyun has gained a foothold in the Black Fortress, and her power, combined with the Devourer, poses a serious threat. The subordinates advise canceling the operation given the risks, but the Holy Father reminds Cardinal Eland of the power of the Church and the Drasen Empire, which once together became the dominant forces on the continent. He is determined not to give up despite betrayal and danger, believing that their power and influence should overcome any obstacles. The Holy Father reflects on the nature of evil and good, arguing that the evil of demons is necessary so that good can manifest itself more clearly and become a force that unites the people of Gatren. He admits that, until now, cooperation with the Demon King has allowed him to control the course of the war. But if the demons continue to evolve, control will become impossible. In addition, information has come from a spy about the unexpected change of location for the next stage of the tournament. It is now planned for Ini Mositiles, an area full of monsters, which adds new dangers and intrigue. The Holy Father notes that the location of the next stage of the tournament, Inemo City Forest, is quite far from the Black Fortress, and he takes this as a sign of divine support. He orders the Cardinal to gather the heroes to use the situation to test their strength. Meanwhile, Hyun Seok is surprised that if he uses normal and dark mana at the same time, his skill window becomes incredibly difficult. The fairy reminds that Hyunsuk used to be like a pony, performing one move, which was taught to him by Cowhead. Now, the skills window contains the official Reedran martial arts style and two new skills. Dark Mana Burst and Nobility are displayed separately, highlighting the growth and uniqueness of Hyun Seok's fighting style. Status window, Magic question mark, +4 skills, Reedrun style, martial arts options, boost, Dark Mana Burst. So now Hyun Seok has a total of 5 skills. Leadership skill has also improved. A new useful effect has appeared. Leadership is now at level S, and the performance abilities of subordinates, that is, the commander, have increased significantly. Not a bad promotion, the fairy noted. Hyun Seok looked into the shop to see if there were any items that could increase his stats. Park Hyun replied that there was no need to be mistaken. He was not at that level yet. The commander of the 4th Corps is here. Hensok was surprised. Park Hyun noted that Hyun Suk was too noisy and asked him to just say how many hero points he currently had. He replied, 1,300, the average rank of the store. Hyun Suk was surprised, and she added that at this level, the store was full of trash. Then he asked what was the best thing to buy at his level. Park Hyun laughed and called him a parasite who wanted to get rich off of other people's knowledge. She offered a deal. If she says it, Hyun-suk has to answer all her questions. He agreed. She explained that, of the skills he had, the ones that were useful were those that were based on aura, but since he already had an aura, it's worth simply upgrading the store and buying a pocket expansion, something like inventory, quite useful for its cost. Now, it was her turn to ask questions. First, she asked if he was really a hero. Hyun-suk replied that he was something like that. Secondly, she asked him what he was doing in the Demon King's army. Hyun-suk admitted that it was pure coincidence. Third, she asked how he managed to use magic and dark mana at the same time. Hyun-suk explained that it just happened naturally. She summed it up. He's a hero, somehow ended up in the Demon King's army and can use two powers at the same time. Hyun-suk agreed. She thought it was complete nonsense. Then he noticed that she was there too, but suddenly he got kicked in the face. A little time passed. Park Hyun called out to Hyun-suk, who was lying on the floor. She offered to help him get into the fourth building and personally contribute to his development. Hyun-suk refused. Then Park Hyun snapped her fingers and 50 kilograms of weight fell on Hyun's legs. She asked him why he was so keen to stay there. Hyun-suk explained that he was afraid that Mrs. Hemes was going to kill him. Park Hyun asked if there were any other reasons. He admitted that he dreams of marrying a blonde aristocrat and having 5 children. Park Hyun was surprised, but allowed him to do what he wanted, warning him that the devourer would definitely not let him go. Hyun-suk added that he became more attached to life here than he expected. Hyun-suk was preparing for the third round of the tournament, putting on gloves and fastening his belt. He asked Bobo to look after the house, promising to return as soon as possible. Bobo sighed heavily in response. The fairy clarified that after the stadium, they would immediately go to the Inamosit with the others. Hyun-suk confirmed. He sighed and opened the door, saying, "Well then, let's go to the land of the monsters of Inamosit." A system window appeared. Level increased. A new level for one killed mob. Hyun-suk was happy. He had already leveled up 4 levels, and it seemed like a dream to him. Before him stood a dryad, a demonic plant-like female creature. They helped other plant monsters reproduce by exchanging pollen. "What is this?" Hyun-suk asked, holding Dryad. "The rules for the third stage of the tournament have appeared. Reach the forest teeming with demonic creatures. The stage ends when 24 participants emerge from the forest. Each is given a magic item, the tracking sphere. Powered by dark mana and created for Hemes's amusement, this sphere reveals the location of all participants every hour." The fairy was surprised by the magical skills of the Demon King's army. They could use really complex spells. Hyun-suk decided to quickly take what he needed and leave before anyone noticed. It seemed like there was no one around until suddenly Hyun-suk received a strong blow to the head. The goat found him and was sure that now he would not be able to escape. A nearby tree was covered in an irritated Roigo, tired of playing the role of guard dog. There were many guards at the Inamosit teleportation gate. The goblin nearby reminded him that this passage was the only way, and if it broke, it would be a serious problem. Suddenly, Roigo became wary when a group of people in cloaks appeared, from whom almost no magical energy emanated. He thought that if he attacked first after discovering the gate, it could lead to complications. Inamosit was too big to head here. Roigo had a bad feeling about it, but decided to wait for now. The goat threatened with its power, offering Hyun-suk either to tremble and beg for mercy or to fight immediately. He did not consider running away a disgrace, reminding that scars on the back are a disgrace for a swordsman, and not for one who fights with fists. Hyun-suk thought about the possibility of killing the goat, but he warned that if he was killed, it would be a mistake, since he possessed very valuable information. Hyun-suk was surprised and asked Goat to tell him what information he had. The goat reported that Hyun-suk was at the top of all demons' death list. Hyun-suk was surprised again, but asked where the others were and why Goat was alone. The goat began to list numbers, 5, 4, 3, 2, and suddenly the attack began. The goblins, led by Holgath, found the man and were screaming for his death. Hyun-suk was tired of being bullied and was ready to act. The Black Fortress's grand arena was the center of intense attention. The pictogram on the screen displayed the events happening to Hyun-suk, causing a lot of interest. Park and Hines had been closely monitoring the developing hunt for Hyun-suk, which came as a surprise to them. Hemes expressed regret, to which Park Hyun responded with a caustic remark, her attitude towards the situation being much harsher. Suddenly, a voice came with a report. They were attacked by a squad of people armed with devices for stealth attacks, trying to break down the portal gate. Their opponents somehow learned the exact location of the portal, which caused serious concern. The image in the icon has disappeared. Hems immediately gave the order. Riedran was about to move to the attack site immediately. Hemes noticed that the people clearly came prepared and suspected that there was a traitor among them. Hyunsuk, hiding in the bushes, was perplexed as to how something like this could happen at the tournament and complained about the organizers. The fairy urged him to be quiet, as the danger was real. The goblins chasing Hyunsuk discussed having to wait for the next update of the tracking sphere, adding to the tension. Hyunsuk was very afraid and was not sure if he would survive. The fairy advised to level up even faster, perhaps by organizing a massacre. In search of salvation, Hyunseok decided to check the store, hoping to find something that could change the course of events. Suddenly, a man in a cloak approached him, removing his hood, and his subordinates followed his example. Hyunsuk was surprised. In front of him was a hero named Andrew Taylor, who apologized for being late. A system window appeared with a new hero task. It warned that a clash with a group of evil heroes was almost a guarantee of death. The main goal was to survive at any cost, and the secondary goal was to eliminate the entire group. A reward of 1,000 hero points was promised for completing the task. Suddenly, the players pursuing him appeared. Hyunsuk tried to play on the demons' emotions by calling on them to sing the song of the Third Corps, the Demon King's army, to raise their morale and fighting spirit. Andrew and the goat noticed and were surprised by this move. They started singing. A notification appeared. Charisma and leadership activated. Morale increased. The demons, driven by Hyunseok's charisma and leadership skills, supported his call and rushed to attack the humans. An intense battle ensued, where the loyalty and strength of the Demon King's army proved to be key factors. Hyunsuk addressed his comrades with a sense of gratitude and slight sadness, promising to remember their sacrifice. The fighting continued around him, and he knew that many of them would not last long. The thought of the approaching hero was troubling him when suddenly someone grabbed him by the bandage on his neck. It was Roigo who reported that people had destroyed the portal to the fortress, and the guards had most likely died, and he himself had miraculously survived. There were about 40 enemies, most at the level of battalion commander, 3 at the level of regiment commanders, and 1 at the level of division commander. The commander honestly admitted that it was practically impossible to get out alive. Especially with tracking spells making them easier to find, the situation looked hopeless. After all, Hyunsuk and the commander occupied the highest positions in the Demon King's army, which meant that it was easy to track them down. Hyunsuk asked if the spell on him could be lifted given their magical abilities. The commander replied that it would take too much time and they simply did not have it. At that moment, the ball beeped, warning of danger. A high-level demonic creature appeared nearby. Hyunsuk guessed that it might be a monster and turned to the commander. The commander concentrated, preparing for action. Hyunsuk, thinking about the situation, suddenly suggested a plan. The people in robes walked forward confidently, determined to destroy the demons. Andrew reported that the traitorous hero had escaped, and they continued east, where he sensed he was not the only one. Andrew realized that a flockclade had appeared nearby, a medium-sized combat power from 250,000 to 300,000, and one of the strongest predators, Inimosita. This huge plant-like demonic creature was considered extremely dangerous and required at least one hero-level fighter to destroy it. It could be driven away, but the damage would be significant. Birds flew up around them, and a mysterious flower appeared in front of them. Andrew noted that it was these two that had attracted Flockclade's attention, and the traitor remained a separate issue. In their hands, they held an item, perfume with pheromones that emit a scent that attracts certain monsters. The further the spray was from the target, the weaker the effect, but it still slightly increased the likelihood of monsters approaching people. Hyun-suk was determined to survive at any cost, even if he had to become something like a tree in the body of a female. Andrew said he could handle it. Andrew leapt into battle, striking, demonstrating advanced swordsmanship, the first form of the hero's path. Roigo watched the battle closely, and Hyun-suk promised to take on the small monsters and asked to hold out for a little while. Andrew asked if the commander was going to drag things out any longer, but he remained silent. Everything was preparing for the final clash, at the top of Flocklade, before engaging the enemy. Hyun-suk explained that the plan would make the most of their strengths, constantly run away, draining the enemy's stamina, and use the demonic beast as a living shield to absorb attacks. At this time, his stealth skill was activated, as well as whip and fast movement, supporting abilities that are effective at medium to long range. While the ally was maneuvering, Hyun-suk was going to deal with the monster himself. Hyun-suk stressed that the key to success was to avoid frontal attacks and called his plan Operation Attack. Andrew, furious, demanded that the escape be stopped, calling it a cowardly approach. Roigo understood that this was exactly the tactic people usually used, and although it seemed mean, it was precisely this that allowed us to gain time and save strength. Hyun-suk approached the man in the cloak, who was monotonously repeating about the need to destroy the traitor. He suddenly rushed into the attack, waving his sword and trying to strike with a scream. Hyun-suk barely dodged. Even one missed blow could have been fatal. But he soon realized that although the enemy was dangerous, his movements were predictable, without any special techniques. Ordinary, crude lunges. In a moment of carelessness, the pursuer tripped over Hyun-seok's leg and fell to the ground. A subsequent kick to the head incapacitated him. The system immediately notified, "The level has increased." Everything happened faster than expected, and Hyun-suk was surprised by the easy victory. But something was wrong. He began to suspect that despite their human appearance, there was something alien in their movements. Perhaps they were not quite human. However, the joy was short-lived. Due to the constant use of enhancements, Hyun-seok's body began to fail. He felt that he couldn't last long in this mode. The system issued a new message. Dark Mana Mastery skill increased from C to B. At that very second, Hyun-suk's body began to change. Black, curved horns emerged from his head, and his eyes flashed a blinding white light. Another notification followed. Temporary synchronization of the body with dark mana. Transformation initiated. Andrew moved forward, gradually closing the distance. Roigo felt his strength was running out. The demonic beast used as cover was on the verge of going out of control. He became more and more aggressive with each passing second. Andrew, confident in his victory, knew that with each demon he defeated, his level increased. He was currently at 983, and the death of this monster could raise him to 1,000. The attacks followed one after another. The commander parried the blows with difficulty, using a root torn from the stem of a flower, a thick vine that became an improvised weapon. Andrew pressed harder and harder, mentioning that once his skills improved, it would be easy for him to deal with people like him. But Roigo wasn't acting blindly. He was biding his time. He was deliberately letting Andrew focus on him to give Hyun-seok a chance. It was at this moment that the trap was activated. The flower that Andrew approached began to glow, and Roigo threw out the magical bonds, binding the enemy. It was all part of a preconceived plan, unofficially dubbed the Steel of the Last Blow. The idea was to let a strong enemy drain the monster and then deliver the finishing blow and gain all the experience. Hyun-seok, acting from the shadows, was already eliminating minor opponents while the commander held the hero back. The commander understood the weaknesses of this plan. Firstly, the question of whether Hyun-suk would be able to do everything on time remained open until the last moment. Secondly, the very fact of leveling up after killing the demonic beast did not guarantee victory over the hero. Level is just a number, but combat is art, determination, and strategy. Andrew was seasoned in dozens of battles and was already at an extremely high level. However, Hyun-suk made a bet. The commander, who held Andrew with magical chains, allowed Hyun-suk to deliver the final blow to the demonic monster. At the same moment, a system notification about the level increase arrived. The flower, emitting a death rattle, fell down, and Hyun-suk, engulfed in a white glow, approached the commander and thanked him for his assistance. Now Andrew stood before him, a heroic veteran, confident in himself and underestimating the new convert. He unleashed another attack, using an advanced form of swordsmanship, the Dragon Slayer, a deadly technique. But Hyun-suk, already changed, held back the first blow. His eyes glowed with an inhuman light, and his entire figure exuded strength. He had no intention of giving in. A furious close-quarters fight began. The sword collided with dull blows, the speed of movement exceeding anything that could be seen with the naked eye. Andrew realized that he was no longer fighting prey, but an equal. Hyun-suk went on the offensive, his movements fast and precise, each attack carrying deadly intent. Andrew, not wanting to give in, activated one of the highest techniques, the seventh form of advanced fencing. Both fighters were thrown back by the force of the blow. Andrew lost his footing and crashed into a stone wall, leaving a crack in it. He struggled to his feet, breathing heavily, and could not believe what was happening. This wasn't just any opponent he was facing. He was fighting someone he didn't think should be that strong. Thoughts were spinning in my head. Who is he? Is he really a demon? Hyun-suk, without giving him time to think, approached and attacked again. He spoke calmly, almost indifferently, as if sharing a personal observation. Everyone he had fought before was stronger than him. He delivered a powerful blow that made Andrew scream in pain. Hyun-suk grabbed his face and pressed him hard into the ground. At that moment he said that it was precisely thanks to such fights that he understood something important, that strength is not determined by level, but by something greater. Andrew, realizing the inevitability, tried to stop him, shouting, reminding him that they were both heroes and on the same side. But for Hyun-seok, everything had already been decided. He finished his thought by emphasizing that the level was just a number, and at that very moment he dealt the final blow, putting an end to this battle. A series of system notifications appeared. The level was increased. A new window appeared. A hidden characteristic was unlocked. The spirit of battle has been activated, increasing resistance to mental debuffs and increasing focus in battle. The battle spirit value has reached 10. Hyun-suk was lying on the ground, sprawled out on the grass, his bones and muscles literally burning with pain. He was moaning, thinking he was dying. Roigo came closer and asked if he was alive. Hyun-suk weakly muttered that he was already dead. In response, the commander, without further ado, began to pour red liquid onto his face. Hyun-suk asked in surprise what this strange nastiness was. The commander explained that the potion was brought by his fairy, Rachel. She added that it was a high-quality healing potion that could heal severe wounds and restore mana little by little. It costs 500 hero points. Hyun-suk sat up with difficulty and asked where she got such a valuable item. Rachel calmly replied that she had picked it up from the dead heroes, who had lost all their equipment after their death. Hearing this, Hyun-suk thought for a moment, how strange this world is. The fairy asked what it was about. Hyun-suk explained that in his mind, heroes were supposed to stand on the side of good, fight evil, and save the world. But in this reality, everything is different. Even killing another hero is not punished. On the contrary, such actions can be rewarded. He admitted that he had acted like a villain, but no retribution came to him. The commander just shrugged and said that it all depends on the point of view. From his point of view, Hyun-seok is a real hero, because he was the one who saved his life. There is no point in clinging so strongly to the concepts of human morality. Everything has two sides, right and wrong. But in this world, it means almost nothing. Hyun-suk weakly asked if they were trying to console him. In response, the commander, without much ceremony, kicked him with his foot and ordered him to be quiet and rest. Hyun-suk screamed in pain, complaining that his bones were being broken. The commander calmly reported that he had managed to send a signal for help before communication was lost, and that help was already on the way. Hyun-suk smiled with relief. At that moment, dust rose up ahead. Ridran was running towards them. He activated a simple portal, and the group entered it. Hyun-suk whispered that he was back. They found themselves in the Black Fortress, the location of the Third Corps of the Demon King's army. But Hyun-suk immediately noticed that the fortress was engulfed in flames. He asked in confusion what was going on. Everyone around was stunned. Hemis appeared. Pakyun asked if that wasn't enough to calm her down, since everyone knew she wasn't a traitor. Hemis replied that she didn't care who was who. She wasn't in the mood right now, and therefore she prefers to get rid of any potential threats that have wormed their way into her army. Pakyun responded by calling her crazy, assuring her that she had already explained everything. Suddenly, there was an explosion. A monster emerged from the smoke. It was Ozgez, the commander of the 5th Corps of the Demon King's army, the head of the Koden tribe. He relayed the Demon King's order: stop everything immediately. Hemis was surprised at how quickly the rumors spread. But then she realized that even if the information had been sent immediately after the attack, the king would not have been able to react so quickly. So he already knew. So someone was using Hemis as bait, which meant there was more than one traitor in their ranks. Ozgis called for an end to senseless guesswork and not to go overboard. Hemis, echoing his words, admitted that she had indeed gone too far. She recalled how she had once saved Rotak from people, for which, as punishment, she had been imprisoned in a fortress where she had spent a whole century. According to her, this was the real overkill. She specified that, most likely, Ozgis had in mind this particular case, the rescue of Rotak. In response, Ozgis fell silent. Ridran, confused, asked Hemis to stop. Even Ozgis seemed surprised by what was happening. Hemis calmly said that she was finished and, placing her hand on Ozgis's shoulder, advised him to be grateful to his nephew. Hyun-suk wondered in confusion what was going on. Even the Demon King's army was in chaos. She then asked if Hyun-suk was really going to stay in the Demon King's army. He replied that he was not sure, but at this moment, they had definitely become Gatrin's worst enemies. Hyun-suk admitted that it will now be difficult for him to get along with people. Horns grow from his head, and he uses dark mana, which is not very welcome. The saint laughed, but listened attentively. Hyun-suk told about the heroes he had encountered. Except for the main thing, everyone seemed strange, as if they were under hypnosis. Even when they were killed, there was no emotion on their faces. He asked if anything was known about this. The saint admitted that she was not very aware of it. She had not been to the places where such events take place for a long time. There are indeed many strong heroes in the Holy Empire, and most of the wars against demons are fought under their leadership. However, the reason why there are so many heroes there, and why they grow in power so quickly, is a closely guarded secret. There are rumors of brutal methods, and the Drasen Empire, on the contrary, rejects heroes altogether. At that moment, the doors opened and Ridran appeared. He apologized for the interruption and said that Holy Lady Hemis wanted to see Hyun-suk. Hemis announced that there was an important trip ahead before the war. A special magical field of spatial interference needed to be installed. Hyun-suk asked what it meant. She explained that it was a kind of barrier that blocked unauthorized movement, so that, for example, no one could sneak into your personal space like a hired killer. Such fields can only be placed in the second building. Hemis said that they were the ones who would go there, in the role of her envoy and the envoy's personal physician. This was a kind of payment for her protection from bloodthirsty people. Roigo asked why she was being given this task again. Hemis replied that she would send a guide with them. She warned him to take care of Hyunsuk and Saint. If anything happened to them in the second building, the consequences would be severe.